Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and those watching on the webcast. The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold the Mayor to account and scrutinise his policies. This is Mayor's question time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. May I take this opportunity, being that this is the first meeting of this year, to welcome you all back to the Assembly and say Happy New Year to you, Mr. Mayor, and also to remind members that this may be a new year, but the standing orders are the same as those in last year. In case of an emergency and any need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow security staff, and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones. Can I please request Rebecca Arnold, our clerk, to confirm if there are any apologies of absence?
We have no apologies for absence today, Chair.
Thank you. Since the last Assembly member meeting of Mayor's Question Time on the 15th of December, the audit panel met to carry out a detailed review of the London Power due to the concerns around its status, particularly against the backdrop of the current energy market. The Budget and Performance Committee progressed further in its scrutiny of the Mayor's budget by questioning the Transport for London Commissioner on TfL's budget submission for 2023-24. The following day, the Mayor and Performance Committee questioned the Mayor on his 23-24 budget and summoned him to attend a further meeting. The Housing Committee questioned guests in an informal session on the challenges that older Londoners face. The Environment Committee held a forum with London-based environmental groups to ask what the Mayor's green priority should be for 2023. For the second of two meetings on counter-terrorism and radicalisation, the Police and Crime Committee looked at how prepared London's emergency services are for a terrorism attack. The GLA Oversight Committee questioned the Deputy Mayor for Communities and Social Justice on the Mayor's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion strategy. The Transport Committee examined what impact an increase in public transport fares for 23-24 would have on passengers and passenger behaviour. And finally, the Economy Committee held the first of two meetings on barriers to work in London, focusing on the difficulties that Assembly seekers and refugees face when assessing employment in the United Kingdom. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interests set out in item number 2? Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? I take it as silence means no. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on the 17th of November and 1st December 2022 and the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 15th of December 2022 for me to sign as true records? Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period 2nd December 2022 to 5th of January 2023, and the Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in the length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and belated Happy New Year to everyone. I hope everyone had a pleasant Christmas. 2022 was a difficult year for our city, and for many Londoners, 2023 is shaping up to be just as tough. For the first time this calendar year, I activated our severe emergency weather plan earlier this week to protect homeless Londoners, with additional emergency accommodation being opened up to support those at risk. I couldn't be prouder of the work my administration has done to help rough sleepers. Since 2016, we've quadrupled funding for homelessness and managed to help over 13,500 rough sleepers off the streets. However, even with our record investment, rough sleeping continues to rise. This is symptomatic of catastrophic failures in national policy, whereby we now have more than a decade of austerity combining with a devastating cost of living emergency, meaning the pipeline of rough sleepers to London streets continues. I'll leave my opening remarks there, Chair, because we've got a lot to get through, and some of the issues I would have raised are dealt with in some of the questions later on. I do have, though, two requests for oral updates. The first from Caroline Pigeon on the David Carrick case. I'm absolutely sickened and appalled by the truly abhorrent offences David Carrick committed. Londoners will be rightly shocked that this man was able to work for the Met Police Service for so long, and serious questions must be answered about how he was able to abuse his position in this horrendous manner. I'm in close contact with the Met Police Commissioner about this case. Sir Mark agrees that Carrick should never have been a police officer and has assured me that an individual like him would not pass the reformed vetting processes to become a police officer now. The work to reform the culture and standards of the MPS has already started, with Baroness Louise Casey's interim review now complete, and a new anonymous police complaints hotline and anti-corruption team recently established by Sir Mark. But more can and must be done. MPS Operation Onyx is now reviewing officers and staff who have reports against them concerning domestic or sexual incidents. The Commission and I have again called for the Home Secretary to urgently reform police regulations governing misconduct to help raise standards in the police. This review must conclude urgently and ensure that the MPS and forces across the country have the powers they need to remove officers who commit wrongdoing. I'd like to pay tribute to the incredibly brave victims who came forward to report David Carrick. Anyone who is in need of support can access the London Victim and Witness Service or the Specialist London Survivor Gateway. I also, Chair, have been asked for a second oral update request from Assembly Member Keith Brince on Gallows Corner violence. Local people would have been very concerned to hear about this incident, which I'm advised by the Met Police Service was a fight between two people known to each other. Injuries were thankfully not life-threatening. Police attended and arrested one individual at the scene on suspicion of grievous bodily harm. The other individual has been identified, and the Met Police Service is working to detain him. Any witness is asked to call 101, quoting CAD 4545/13 Jan, or ring Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111.
I think Assemblymember Boff, you have a question on the oral update?
Yes.
Okay.
You said, Mr. Mayor, that you couldn't be more proud of the work that you've done on rough sleeping. Could you write to me and indicate how much of the funds on rough sleeping actually come from government and how much are locally sourced?
Great. Okay. We now move on to questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that's proportionate to their size. The first question is number 0283, unemployment in London, in the name of Assemblymember Devenish.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I'm committed to supporting Londoners into good jobs and am investing £380 million in skills programmes annually to give Londoners the support they need. On many measures, London is recovering strongly from the pandemic. The employment rate is around 76%, close to pre-pandemic peaks and above the UK-wide average. And London is creating jobs again, with around 35,000 being added between April and September last year. But we can't avoid the fact that the government's hardline Brexit has weakened our economy, and more Londoners, including businesses, are worried about their futures. I want to see more Londoners moving into good work, earning the London living wage and progressing into successful long-term careers. My Good Work Standard sets the benchmark for good employment in London. More than 115 organisations are now accredited, employing over 245,000 Londoners, and over 3,000 organisations are now accredited as London living wage employers, more than 4 times as many since I first became mayor, with over 1.2 million employees working for these organisations. My £330 million per annum adult education budget supports over 200,000 Londoners a year to upskill. Since taking control of this budget, London has excelled and is the highest performing region nationally, with enrolments increasing by 18% since 2019 and 20. Londoners in low pay who are currently unemployed or aged between 19 and 23 can get free courses and help is also available with childcare, transport costs, student loans and other support to help Londoners get learning. I launched the Skills Boot Camps for Londoners programme in 2022. This supports Londoners underrepresented in key sectors like green, digital and construction into training and interviews for good jobs. In 2022-2023, we expected to see at least 3,000 learners move into new job or increased opportunities in self-employment. My skills programme prioritises Londoners who are unemployed or underrepresented in the workforce or facing barriers to work. As of last September, 20,000 moved into work, an apprenticeship or work placement. London and Partners continues to bang the drum for London around the world, attracting investment from all corners of the globe that helps create more jobs for Londoners. I'll continue to support Londoners to access good jobs and develop successful careers in sectors key to the capital's growth, targeting the funding proposed in my draft budget for 23-24 to those who need it the most. But we can only get so far. As I said in my Mansion speech last week, it's the government's disastrous economic policies, including its approach to Brexit, that are damaging job creation in London.
Happy New Year, Mr. Mayor. Rather than go through all the issues you've raised, can I just ask you, would you consider holding a job summit this year with business? Because you did say at the beginning of this term that it's jobs, 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 and it's about creating jobs. I don't want an argument today about us, you versus the government. It's about jobs, jobs, jobs. Could you have a business summit this year for jobs to ensure more Londoners have jobs in this great city of ours?
We do already, Chair. We don't call them summits, we call them fairs, but I'm more than happy to write to the member setting out our plans for the year, and I'm really happy to receive any other ideas he's got. We work really well with the business groups across London, but I'm always happy to hear any other ideas colleagues may have. So I'll write to him with what we've planned, and feel free to meet with my team to discuss other ideas you've got.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Berry. The use of space in the Silvertown Road Tunnel.
Thank you for your question. The Silvertown scheme has been designed to address the long-standing issues of congestion, frequent closures and a lack of resilience at the Blackwall Tunnel. The Blackwall Tunnel is a Victorian tunnel built for horses and carriages. It has to be closed on average around 700 times a year, and if it closes for 6 minutes, the queue quickly extends to 3 miles. Last year it closed 725 times. I'm confident TfL's design for the Silvertown Tunnel is the right one, designating space for one lane of general traffic and reserving another for buses, coaches and HGVs in each direction. This arrangement will crucially make buses faster and more reliable and increase safety by keeping larger vehicles separate from other traffic. The scheme has undergone years of development and has been subject to regular public scrutiny and review, including 10 separate public consultations. TfL's development work considered alternative proposals such as trams or an extension to the DLR. Such schemes wouldn't address current issues at the Blackwall Tunnel and would also present significant feasibility challenges, in particular regarding how a full route, not just a short stretch through the tunnel, would be delivered. I am, however, working with local boroughs and landowners to drive forward our shared ambition for an extension of the DLR to Thamesmead and Beckton Riverside, and will be submitting a business case to government shortly. As a nationally significant infrastructure project, the scheme progressed through the relevant planning processes, including a 6-month public examination and culminating in the Secretary of State for Transport approving a development consent order. TfL subsequently entered into a project agreement for the private finance, design, build and maintenance of the tunnel, with construction now well underway. The scheme was further reviewed in TfL's recent funding settlement with the government, in which the scheme's completion is an explicit condition. Changing the scheme at this late stage would go against the development consent order, go against the project agreement and be in breach of the DfT-TfL funding conditions. That said, we know the original Blackwall Tunnel was designed for horses and carts over 100 years ago. I'm sure we and our successors will continue to discuss how best to develop the Silvertown and Blackwall tunnels, including the user charge and bus services over the next 100 years. This is why TfL has committed to an unprecedented programme to monitor traffic, air quality and the overall impacts of the scheme once it opens.
Mr. Mayor, good morning.
Hi.
I'm hoping today we can have a conversation that ignores completely the sunk costs fallacy, that recognises, as I do, that the situation we're now in is that we've got a tunnelling machine that's just emerged the other side of the Thames from here, and we have a vast, at least single-bore tunnel to make use of. I'm hoping that we can together imagine this situation as a blank canvas. Now, I've been working with local people to look at ideas based on the situation that we're in with a scale model. And it seems like there are loads of practical ways we could make use of this space for good, sustainable travel. Now, I mean, you're the chair of the C40, a global network of mayors taking urgent climate leadership. So my question is, in terms of climate leadership, what would a climate leader, the chair of the C40, do when faced with the situation we're in now, with all the choices in the world of what used to make of the space in this tunnel that exists? Would they fill it with cars and lorries?
What they wouldn't do, or what I'm not doing, is putting my head in the sand and wishing this away. Blackwall Tunnel can't be wished away. 725 closures last year can't be wished away. A short delay leading to 3-mile queues can't be wished away. A project agreement can't be wished away. A development consent order can't be wished away. A deal with the government with conditions can't be wished away. And one of the things you've got to do, whether you're a climate leader or a leader of other senses, is to be honest and candid. And I'm being honest and candid in saying the Silvertown Tunnel addresses the problems in this part of London, but also addresses the injustices where in this part of London there are so few river crossings, there are so few options in relation to public transport, and there isn't sort of links in public transport there are in other parts of our city. That injustice is being addressed by this tunnel.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, I do hear that you claim your climate credentials. I also heard last week in this room the excellent campaigner Leo Murray from Possible, who clearly talked about the harm that the Silvertown Road Tunnel has done to your credibility on climate. Now, what I want to ask next about is about your discussions with local councils, because the report that I published before Christmas of ideas, a lot of them came from local councils, things they have in earlier years proposed for this site and for this tunnel, as well as ideas for adding to the clear need for more walking and cycling connections in that area. On both sides of the river, before and after you sign the contract, there are council leaders of Greenwich Council and the Mayor of Newham who've been clear that they oppose this tunnel and would like something else to look at. So we're in this ideal pause and review situation now. When did you last speak with leaders of these councils about the tunnel, and are you open to their ideas?
Sorry, just for clarity, what's the pause and review situation you referred to?
Where we've completed one bore.
Well, there's no pause and there's no review, for clarity. And you'll be aware. Listen, I appreciate there's a vocal minority for whom this is a big issue, but there have been 10 separate public consultations. This scheme has undergone years of development, subject to regular public scrutiny and reviews, as I said, including the 10 separate public consultations. I met with the leader of one of the councils this week. She didn't mention the scheme to me. She welcomed our investment in schemes in her borough, leading to radically new offers for people who need desperate affordable housing.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'm out of time, I'm afraid. I know you almost dismissed me on this, but I really hope you will keep talking to local representatives of the people about this project. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. The next question is on High Street Sport in the name of Assemblymember Bukhari.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. My High Streets for All mission has been leading a coordinated response to the economic and social recovery of London's high streets since the COVID-19 pandemic. At the heart of the mission is my £4 million High Streets for All challenge. Local partnerships in every London borough have been supported to develop a high street strategy in a key place of need. My regeneration team and Mayor's design advocates are working with 22 exemplar initiatives to test practical solutions through the delivery of projects that will continue during 2023. This builds on the transformational investment I have been making into London's high streets through my Good Growth Fund. £74 million has been invested in 79 projects across the city, which are delivering new civic infrastructure, affordable workspaces and public realm improvements. I'll continue to provide leadership in key sectors through my London Markets Board and Property Exchange. a platform to encourage local landowners, commercial developers and asset managers to deliver social value and promote diversity in the use of their assets. My High Street data service provides regular updates on spend and visitor numbers, alongside provider analysis and support to 22 subscribing London boroughs. Recent work on procuring new data means we will be seeking to expand the service to a wide range of partners. High streets are an integral part of London's economy. They're home to 40% of London's businesses, and 90% of Londoners live within a 10-minute walk of their local high street. I remain committed to supporting our high streets to thrive, using the limited powers and funding I have, but government funding is crucial here, and London needs the government to give us a fair deal, just as the rest of the UK does. London's regularly frozen out of government funding pots, and the funding being made available to London through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the UK SPF, is less than half the size of European funding it replaces. That said, my office has worked with London councils to produce an investment plan for London's £144 million UK SPF funding. £53 million of this fund is being allocated directly to boroughs to support local regeneration and businesses support across the next 3 years.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Last year, the Deputy Mayor for Business actually visited Sutton High Street, where he learnt about the Council's ambitious plans to regenerate its town centre, offering local community a range of businesses. But it has been a tough Christmas for London's restaurants, pubs and bars across the capital, with event cancellation rates being as high as 50%. Will you direct London's Night Czar to work with the Deputy Mayor to look into creating High Street's roadmap for the local authorities, based on actions taken by councils like Sutton?
I'm more than happy for the Night Czar to meet with the member and to Ruth Dombey, the leader of Sutton Council, to discuss any ways we can to assist Sutton High Street. I'm afraid the nighttime economy all across our city, all across the country, has been affected by the pandemic, and they need to bounce back sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Now, with the rising energy costs and rise in London living wage and labour shortages due to Brexit, industrial action, changes to commuting patterns, the upcoming end to business rates relief in March, many of London's hospitality sector wants to see some really clear actions, not just a speech from the Night Czar. Could you clarify what the role of the Night Czar is, so that we can draw attention to these particular issues and evaluate their performance?
Well, I'm surprised the member asked for a meeting with the Night Czar and doesn't know what her role is. So the role of the Night Czar is to support the nighttime economy. That's the economy that exists between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. Not just the obvious nighttime economy like those high streets where there are fantastic businesses, live music venues, pubs, bars and restaurants, but also those who work, for example, the NHS, those who work in public transport, those cleaners, porters and others who work during the course of the night, real serious health issues in relation to them. She also plays a huge role in supporting those venues that are in danger of closure. The culture at risk work that she has done with Justin Simons has led to many businesses that otherwise would have been closed down staying open, and she signposted many of them to sources of funding and support they otherwise wouldn't receive. At the same time, she advises other parts of the city administration into policies that would support the nighttime economy, and convenes councils to meet with others to support the nighttime economy. A good example of the work the Night Czar has done recently is in relation to speaking to licensing authorities to learn the lessons from the O2 tragedy in Brixton that led to 2 people losing their lives and another person still critically unwell. Question: how many other nighttime venues across London have similar concerns? And that's one of the things the Night Czar has been doing, working with others across City Hall. Another big role the Night Czar played is in relation to making sure that we brought back this year more than 100,000 people to New Year's Eve on the River Thames to have the fireworks celebration, really supporting those businesses in the West End, with people coming to see the fireworks after having gone for a meal, after the fireworks going to a club to celebrate in the new year. Other examples of the work the Night Czar has done is in relation to the cultural enterprise zones. I was in Greenwich recently with her and the leader of Greenwich Council.
I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that, but there's also really great examples from Manchester's Nighttime Economy Advisor, who launched a Give the Gift of Going Out campaign to help the city's struggling hospitality sector. Will you look to learn from Manchester's Nighttime Advisor, who's well respected by the industry, to ensure that you have the right resources to support and enhance London's nighttime economy?
I'm really pleased to see where London leads, Manchester follows. The Manchester position happened after London's night czar. So it's a case of the other way round, but I'm more than happy always. And Amy's got great relations with those in Manchester and Bristol who have followed London's lead. Always happy to work with colleagues across the UK.
Well, he's setting a great example, and I hope that we can do more to help London's nighttime economy following those kind of actions. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Hirani, the NHS in crisis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your question. The timing couldn't have been better. Our NHS is facing unprecedented pressures. Waiting lists for planned care are the highest on record, and Londoners are facing huge delays when seeking emergency treatment. In November alone, over 7,150 Londoners spent more than 12 hours waiting to be admitted to a hospital bed. And in the final week of December, more than 1,800 London ambulances were delayed by over an hour when handing over patients. The pressures our health system is currently facing are the result of over a decade of underfunding and neglect from the government. The emergency measures currently on offer from the government are both too little and too late to tackle the long-term damage that's been inflicted over the past 13 years. That's why I'm calling on the government to step forward immediately and provide the NHS, public health and social care with the long-term funding needed. Hard-working NHS staff who have seen their pay cut in real terms over the past 13 years are exhausted and overstretched, with 1 in every 10 NHS posts currently vacant. Yet despite the staffing crisis that has been building for years, we're still waiting the government's long-promised, repeatedly delayed workforce plan. The government must engage meaningfully with unions on a serious proposal for a fair pay agreement for NHS staff. If they continue to fail on this, we can expect further disruption to services and deepening NHS workforce issues. While I don't have powers to direct or fund the delivery of health services, I continue to work with partners to help ensure all Londoners get the best health care possible. I meet regularly with NHS leaders to discuss the pressures the system is facing and the support the NHS needs. My health and social care academies will bring more Londoners into the health and care workforce. My key worker list for priority housing applies to healthcare staff, and I continue to encourage NHS employers to pay the London living wage. I'll continue to urge the government to get a grip on this crisis and finally give the NHS the support it so desperately needs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in response to a Downing Street comment, where a spokesperson said that the NHS has the resources that it needs, Dr. Vishal Sharma, the chair of the Consultants Committee at the British Medical Association, said that for staff working in the NHS or any patients that are desperately trying to access care, Number 10's refusal to admit that the NHS is in crisis will simply seem delusional. Do you agree with Dr. Sharma's comments?
Look, as a rule of thumb, I always listen to clinicians at the coalface in relation to the consequences of decisions made in the centre. It's simply not the case that the NHS has enough resources to address the crisis it is facing. And this crisis existed before the pandemic. Don't believe the nonsense that the reason for the crisis is because of the pandemic. You'll remember, because you and I visited many communities affected during the pandemic, the lack of preparation versus other countries, lack of PPE, lack of ventilators, fewer beds, social care crisis, all these predated the pandemic, and they've been exacerbated by austerity and the pandemic.
Absolutely. And is it any wonder that after over 12 years of austerity resulting in cuts to the NHS and the staffing crisis, that the NHS is at breaking point? This deterioration does not happen overnight. Today, nurses are entering their 4th day of strikes, a damning failure on the government supporting our NHS heroes, and now they seem to have moved from clapping our key workers to sacking them with their anti-worker legislation. You met with the RCN last year and committed to working with London's nursing community and being their advocate and champion. Can you update the Assembly on how you're supporting nurses and the NHS?
Well, firstly, as an advocate and champion of the RCN, I'm disgusted that a former member of the Cabinet, Simon Clarke, is lecturing nurses on the need to better budget when they tell him they need to rely upon food banks. It's disgraceful. We are doing what we can to support nurses in relation to allocation of housing. They will now get ahead of the queue in relation to intermediate housing. We're supporting nurses in relation to more NHS trusts being London Living Wage employees. We're supporting them in relation to work we're doing to address the cost of living crisis, but also the advocacy that's so important in relation to a decent pay deal for the nurses. By the way, it's not just the nurses. Doctors, physiotherapists, paramedics, call handlers, ambulance workers are all balloting for strike action in the NHS.
Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to come in on this question because I am a frontline clinician who sees what happens every day in the NHS. After 12 years of austerity, the key workers in the emergency services are experiencing increasing difficulties in working conditions. Mr. Mayor, will you join me in thanking all our emergency workers for the service they have given to protect London in the winter months and right across the year?
Firstly, can I thank you for the work you do in the NHS. Of course, thank all the clinicians. I've never met somebody who works in the NHS who became a doctor, a nurse, physiotherapist, paramedic, call handler because they wanted to become rich. They do it because they believe in public service and giving something back, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. The government should be negotiating, not legislating.
And of course, the other thing, Mr. Mayor, is that the government is legislation to give a safe level of service when workers want to go on strike to complain about how unsafe the service is. Would you agree with me? The irony of situations is the current service provided by the NHS isn't safe for the public, and that's why the doctors and nurses and ambulance workers are striking to bring attention to this very matter.
Absolutely. Look, the idea that the reason for the crisis in the NHS, people lying on trolleys for 14 hours, people in corridors rather than in wards, people waiting to receive an ambulance for hours, people waiting for years for an operation because of strike action is ridiculous. It's because of deliberate choices made in Downing Street from 2010, first with a coalition government with the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, and from 2015 just the Conservatives. These are political choices made in Downing Street, and that's why the public is on the side of the nurses and not the government.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, the Secretary of State for Health said that to the nurses that there's more money available if they showed greater efficiency. This is a profession for which the nation were clapping them as heroes, and the government needs to be reminded that doctors and nurses give care to patients. They don't produce widgets in a factory. What does greater efficiency mean to a frontline worker in the NHS? And would you join me in saying, in calling upon the government that to resolve this situation, they must sit down and talk to these frontline workers rather than bringing legislation which sacks them rather than acknowledging their heroism in their services?
I saw 2 Sundays ago a leading clinician from King's on the Laura Koonsberg show in a sober way set out some of the challenges facing clinicians, nurses, physiotherapists, ambulance workers, call handlers who service King's, and he was explaining in a cool, calm, sober way what the consequences of 12 years of austerity has meant. I'm unclear when politicians without any training talk about more efficiency in the NHS, what exactly they mean. Where is the fat to cut? Are they meaning longer waiting times? Are they meaning less care from nurses? As it is, often nurses are stretched, going from ward to ward, having to rely upon bank nurses. There are record numbers of vacancies in the NHS, and that's a culmination of poor treatment, poor terms and conditions, and the way there's a lack of respect from those in positions of power and influence about these heroes who serve in the front line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And now back to Dr. Sahota to chair.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the next question is on the economic situation 2023 in the name of Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you for your question. With the limited powers and resources I have, I'm doing all I can to help Londoners deal with these ongoing cost of living pressures by investing an additional £3.7 million this year and a proposed £4.9 million next year in interventions that deliver financial advice and support. This is part of an annual package of over £80 million we're spending on cost of living support. It's in addition to over £400 million investment in skills provision, over £43 million warmer homes programme, and £3.6 billion we're investing over the next 4 years on building the genuinely affordable homes Londoners need. My immediate priorities on cost of living remains the same: ensuring Londoners are aware of the support available with the cost of living, improving Londoners' access to advice, improving household energy efficiency, and addressing crisis issues like food insecurity. These priorities apply to all Londoners, but particularly to Londoners in low-income households. I'm doing this through initiatives like the Cost of Living Hub, a first port of call for any Londoner looking for information on support with the cost of living. I've also recently funded debt-free advice to take their expert debt advisors into a range of community locations around London on their advice bus.
Thank you.
£3.1 million of our funding this year has gone into boosting this capacity.
Apologies, I thought you'd finished, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Price rises are still massively outstripping pay rises. London families face an inflation rate of over 12%, with food inflation having risen by almost 17% in 1 year, the highest it has been since 1977, with a pint of milk costing 65p a year ago and £1.22 today. Is it time the government ensures that Londoners have incomes that they can live on?
And when you hear those sorts of figures you're talking about, the idea of a nurse being lectured to better budget, right? Just think about that. That shows how out of touch this lot are. And so I think the government's got to recognise that it's not just the inflation this year that's a problem. It's because many of the public servants, nurses are one example, have had, in real terms, wage cuts over the last 12 years, because there's, I don't think, been a year where their salary has been ahead of inflation. And when there's an exceptional year like this one, 11, 12, 13%, more than 15% in food, you can understand why families find it hard to keep their heads above the water and having to rely upon food banks. And it's, it takes a lot of, when you're a proud person, and many public servants are, the idea of going to a food bank to receive help when you've got 1, 2, 3 jobs maybe is really hard. That shows how difficult things are. And the government's got to wake up and realise the current offer they have isn't good enough. The help with energy prices falls off a cliff edge in March and April. That's why the government's got to step up and do much, much more.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think we all know how bad the situation is. Well, we certainly do on this side of the chamber, for people in constituencies like my own, where I have spoken about a woman who contacted me again last week to talk to me about her situation, where she could not afford the bus fare to send her child to school last week. She cannot afford to go to work at the moment because she doesn't have the money, and she relies on food banks to keep her family alive. And that is the situation that we are facing at the moment. And the government must wake up to this and see what it is that they have created and look at what they can do to make things better for people. Thank you.
I think there was a question there, wasn't there?
Sorry, do you agree, Mr Mayor?
I do. I do, Chair.
The next question is the name of Assemblymember Rogers. It's on the ULEZ expansion.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Yes, I'm confident that the London-wide expansion of the ULEZ will go ahead on the 29th of August this year. The implementation date for the scheme was chosen to balance the need to take urgent action to reduce toxic air pollution in London with the time needed to prepare the operational aspects of scheme implementation, as well as allowing time for the public to prepare. The ULEZ expansion is a critical step in tackling the triple challenges of air pollution, the climate emergency and congestion, and will ensure 5 million more Londoners can breathe cleaner air, ending the Clean Air Postcode lottery. We cannot delay. Londoners' lives depend on urgent action to clean up our air. Right now, air pollution is damaging children's lungs and creating a higher risk of dementia in older people. More than 4,000 Londoners die prematurely each year because of toxic air, and more than 500,000 Londoners live with asthma, and more are vulnerable to the health impacts of air pollution. In both cases, the majority of these people live in outer London boroughs. I'm simply not prepared to stand by and do nothing to address this. TfL has already made good progress in preparation for the expansion of ULEZ London-wide, building on its experience of infrastructure delivery to ensure we have a successful launch in August this year. Work has been progressing on the preparation for camera and signage installation with the London boroughs. Last week, TfL launched its marketing campaign to increase awareness and understanding of the scheme amongst Londoners and home counties drivers and encourage vehicle check-in to help drivers prepare ahead of the 29th of August. In response to feedback I received during the consultation, I've introduced new supporting measures to support Londoners. In addition to extending the existing exemption periods for London's disabled drivers and community transport minibuses run by not-for-profit organisations to October 2027 and October 2025 respectively, I've introduced new exemption periods for people on a wider range of disability benefits and wheelchair-accessible vehicles. I've also included new high-level payments for wheelchair-accessible vehicles in my £110 million scrappage scheme. Applications for the scrappage scheme will open and new grace periods will begin operation on the 30th of January to help Londoners prepare for the scheme.
Morning, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for your answer. Although you say you have confidence that the scheme will be going ahead on the 29th of August, I'm surprised that you have that confidence. The public backlash against ULEZ expansion is huge and it is growing. And apart from your own consultation that showed that 70% of people in outer London are against this policy, Londoners are increasingly angry with these plans. You've got Facebook groups, for example, like Action Against Unfair ULEZ Expansion, which have appeared and that have almost 20,000 members. And additionally, a number of the boroughs are standing up for their residents and are refusing to cooperate with the installation of ULEZ infrastructure on their roads. Will this stance from the boroughs change your approach?
Well, the four boroughs you refer to, Bromley is top of the league table of most deaths. So who speaks for the 204 families who lost loved ones last year in Bromley, or the 162 families in Bexley, or the 155 families in Hillingdon, or the 118 families in Harrow? I'm quite clear. These policies are designed to improve the quality of air in particularly in out London boroughs who suffer the worst consequences of the air pollution crisis. The largest number of deaths are in outer London, but also the largest numbers of people suffering the consequences with asthma and other issues. Of course, we'll speak to those boroughs in advance of August to ameliorate any concerns they have, but we are determined to clean the air in London.
So on that, before Christmas, TfL threatened to use reserve powers to force the introduction of ULEZ equipment onto borough roads. But at the Budget and Performance Committee on the 4th of January, the TfL Commissioner spoke about that and said that, and I quote, "You could end up with scenarios where one part of London does not have cameras and does not have enforcement." So if some boroughs stand up for their residents and stand firm against your plans to expand ULEZ, would TfL use those reserve powers and force ULEZ infrastructure onto borough roads against their will?
I think TfL will explore all avenues open to them. I don't want to talk in hypotheticals. TfL are speaking to all the boroughs, and I'm hoping that leads to a resolution.
So you say that good progress has been made so far on installing cameras. I understand that around 2,750 cameras are needed for the whole scheme to be implemented. Can you tell us how many cameras so far have been installed?
I can't. I'd be surprised if any have at this stage. So there's also, in addition to the cameras, there's 2,400 new road signs. So the work you talked about in a previous question was the discussions with the council. That's the sort of, I think, the preamble before the works begin. I'm more than happy, Chair, for somebody in TfL to write to the member in relation to where we are now, but I'd be surprised if they'd already been installed, but I can check.
That would be useful. There are pictures of cameras going up across London. Maybe they're unrelated, but if you could write to me with the number that have been installed so far, if any, also details of when those cameras were ordered would be very helpful as well, if possible. Sure. Excellent. Thank you. That's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I take this opportunity of welcoming students from the Salisbury Manor Primary School? All very welcome.
Hi. You were a nice distraction then, walking in.
We asked some questions about the new ULEZ scheme in London, and I'm going to go over to Assemblymember Fortune, who wants to come in on the same issue.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that theme of the implementation date, part of what was required for that was a successful consultation process. Now, you'll know through media reports that our office has obtained some documents that relate to that consultation process. And there's a couple of issues there that I would like to pick up with you. Starting with an email on the 1st of July, which talks about having 30,000 responses. This is an email which, in the subject line, is entitled ULEZ Consultation Weekly Summary Report. Were you aware that there were weekly summary reports going to senior members of your team?
I wasn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were.
At this point, so you weren't aware of these weekly reports, but you wouldn't be surprised if there were. At this point in the consultation process, 66% of Londoners were voting against the expansion of the ULEZ. We go to another email, which is on the 7th of July. This goes from Alex Williams to your Deputy Mayor, Seb Dance. There's a line here that jumped out at me. It said, pulled together a separate note for Sarah Coombs on what we plan to do in the last few remaining weeks of the consultation. Can you tell me why TfL and the Deputy Mayor were proactively monitoring the results, and why were they raising concerns about these results with a view to having some specific actions in the last few weeks?
Sure, I've been asked about emails I wasn't involved in, I know nothing about, but, you know, the key thing is this: on a number of policy areas, it could be policing, it could be housing, it could be transport. I'd expect members of my team to be speaking to relevant organisations. On this particular issue, I didn't receive any updates, nor did I ask for any, between the consultation opening or closing. I was the decision maker.
So you wouldn't be surprised that your Deputy Mayor, for example, was receiving updates on the consultation process?
I would be surprised if TfL or Met Police Service or the relevant land department in City Hall were talking to Deputy Mayors about policy areas in the area.
Okay. So we go to a briefing for the Deputy Mayor on the 13th of July. One of the action points on this agenda is to look at a midpoint review. We go to a page here which talks about proposed additional actions. One of the proposed additional actions it talks of is targeted marketing at younger age groups. Why were TfL targeting marketing at younger age groups?
I've been asked about an email I've not seen, wasn't addressed to me, so I can't really answer that.
So you don't know why TfL was targeting younger age groups?
In general terms, I always encourage us to consult with everybody. In City Hall, since I've become mayor, got a young person's peer group. We do peer outreach work in relation to young people. And so, generally speaking, we like to make sure those who are underserved, what used to be called hard to reach, are no longer underserved. So it may be to do with that, I'm not sure.
Right. So if we look at other groups that were underserved from those consultation responses, women and members of the BAME community, were any of those groups targeted by specific marketing by TfL or other agencies?
I'm not sure about particular marketing.
Okay. On the 13th of October, I asked you if any external agencies have been used to drive responses. You said that you were not aware. If we look at this briefing pack from the 13th of, from July rather, it says Wavemaker has produced a revised marketing plan and proposed further investment in our digital marketing channel and digital audio channel to improve our demographic reach. Do you know who Wavemaker are?
No.
Did your Deputy Mayor tell you about using Wavemaker, who are an external digital agency, exactly the kind of agency I asked you about on the 13th of October?
No, he didn't.
Your Deputy Mayor did not tell you that you were using an external agency. If we go to another page in that report, it talks about summary and next steps. In the summary, it says that they will review the impact of the targeted marketing of younger Londoners, and it also says they will continue to update the GLA. So do you accept that there were regular briefings between TfL and your team regarding consultation results?
When you say my team, I hope most people who work here are part of my team. As I explained to you, in any policy area, I'd expect the relevant policy department to be liaising closely, working closely with members of my team, whether it's in transport, whether it's in housing, whether it's in fire, whether it's in policing or other issues that we deal with. I am the decision maker. I'm quite clear. I wasn't involved.
So these briefings went to senior members of your team, including Seb Dance, who's the Deputy Mayor. Do you know why he told me on the 17th of November that he hadn't been briefed on any of these results? You were sitting next to you at the time, if you recall.
I'm being asked my views on what somebody else was thinking, what they said.
So you're not surprised that your Deputy Mayor was briefed on these results, and when he sat next to you in a meeting on the 17th of November and said he hadn't been briefed on these results, you didn't feel the urge to say anything or correct or question that assertion?
It's a ridiculous question.
I don't think it is. It's a ridiculous answer. At this point, by the way, in the consultation, we see that 67% of Londoners are opposed to the ULEZ expansion. And it's starting to feel, when you read through the papers, that panic is starting to set in. And we see that on the a meeting that was called on the 20th of July. Were you aware of this meeting on the 20th of July, where members of your senior team were in attendance to receive what is called the consultation update?
I'm not sure about the date or the meeting, or whether I was aware or not, until I'd received the documents in my diary at the time to know what I was doing and stuff, so I can't answer the question.
So at this point, 66% of respondents are opposed. In this briefing pack on the 20th of July, which, like I say, sounds like it was a sort of panicked meeting, it says, there's a bullet point here in terms of the consultation overview that says, we've modified our marketing approach to attract younger people to respond to the consultation. We're using social media and updated digital advertising. I would presume that you weren't aware of this targeted marketing approach either. On page 61 of my briefing pack here, it talks about targeted marketing of younger age groups. It says, on the 11th of July 2022, we invested a further £165,000 in promoting the consultation to the under 35 age group via digital marketing, digital audio channels and social media. Were you aware of this spend of £165,000 to specifically target certain members to respond to your ULEZ consultation?
I can't answer as to date. I am aware that money was spent to promote the consultation. I can't give you specifics as to how that was broken down and stuff, but...
So were you aware of that when I asked you in October if you were aware of any money being spent on external agencies advertising?
No, I wasn't. I'm not aware of any particular agencies. I think your question is, are you aware of money being spent to market? That's what I'm saying.
So you were aware that money was spent to market. And would that be you that signs that off?
No.
It wasn't. And do you know if Wavemaker, the external marketing agency, were the group that was used to do that
I don't know.
targeted marketing? Okay. So there are very senior people at this meeting. Like I said, it feels like an emergency meeting. We've mentioned Deputy Mayor Seb Dance. Who is Shirley Rodriguez, please? Could you remind the Assembly?
That isn't a ridiculous question. She's the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy.
Right, so she's one of your Deputy Mayors. When it talks about ongoing engagement in this report, it says that Shirley met with the leaders of 12 NGO organisations, including Rosamond, LCC, Aspir and Lung UK, to mobilise them. Do we know who these NGOs were?
So which NGOs?
The 12 NGOs that Shirley met with?
No.
Okay. What do you think they meant by mobilise them?
I suspect to respond to the consultation.
In a certain way, you would expect as well.
Well, I think it's your inference, not hers, or not what you've read says. But I can understand why you infer that.
Because Shirley's met with 12 NGO organisations to mobilise them. So do you know what was said at that meeting with those NGOs?
I think we've been over this. No, I don't.
I'm trying to understand what your senior team briefed you about.
Well, why don't you...
do you recall telling me that you did not want to influence the results or the process, so you didn't want to be seen to be predetermining the consultation?
Yeah, I'm the decision maker, so I'm quite clear that the first time I saw the final report was on the 18th of November. It was a leave-of-arch file like the one I have for MQTs, and I spent the next few days reading the leave-of-arch file. I was then given a mayoral decision, smaller than this, about 50 pages, which I would have signed on the Thursday after the Friday. And so that's the first time that I saw the final results, was on the 18th of November.
So give me the date you first saw the final results again, please, Mr. Mayor.
It was the report to the Mayor on Friday the 18th of November, and this report included, for your notes, the full analysis of the consultation responses, wider information for my consideration, including public health data and London-wide public data, and recommendations from TfL.
Do you accept that senior members of your team meeting certain pro-ULEZ expansion groups could be seen as predetermining or influencing the result? For example, here there's a very specific bullet point where it asks Breathe London to share the consultation with their networks.
No, for two reasons. One, I am the decision maker, and two, this is not a referendum, this is a consultation. Can
you tell us who Sarah Brown is?
Sarah Brown is the don't have full title, but I think she's the Mayoral Director of Communications, but we can check the full title if it helps.
So why was your Director of Communications attending briefing meetings about the ULEZ consultation results?
Again, you're asking me a question about a meeting that I'm not aware of, but I'm sure, if you were to write to Sarah Brown, I'm sure she could respond to your question.
So you don't know why your Director of Communications was attending a meeting about ULEZ consultation results and receiving those weekly updates?
No.
By the 28th of July, opposition from Londoners stood at 64%. We can also see in here that there are breakdowns of inner London versus outer London results. Do you recall telling me that you didn't have the analysis and that you didn't think it had been done on inner London, outer London and outside London responses?
Well, it was in my final report on the 8th of November.
So you said you didn't think that analysis had been done. Reading from the summary of this pack, it says here, we've carried out further analysis of these responses by area, inner, outer and outside of London, and more details are provided. So do you now recognise that that analysis was done, and this is dating back to July?
Well, the issue was whether the final report had the analysis in, and the final report on the 8th of November was almost 400 pages, I think 350 pages. That had a lot of information in there, including the full analysis of the consultation responses.
On the 17th of November meeting, Caroline Pidgeon, my colleague Caroline Pidgeon, asked you your plans for a scrappage scheme. You said, and I'm quoting here from the transcript, "I simply don't know. I've not seen the report in relation to that." From a briefing in July, on the 28th of July, a bullet point from here, from the Action 2, which says ULEZ 6 months on report. We've evaluated the first scrappage schemes and have a report we are preparing to release alongside the announcement of a new scrappage fund. However, we could release it earlier if desired, as it shows the Mayor has helped SMEs and low-income Londoners. This is a report from July which clearly talks about a scrappage scheme, and the implementation here is that a scrappage scheme has been approved because it can be released earlier, as it's suggested from this bullet point. So why did you tell Caroline Pidgeon you didn't know about a scrappage scheme?
Well, there couldn't have been a scrappage scheme before I signed it off in the mayoral direction on the 24th of November. What's well rehearsed in the public was me lobbying the government for a scrappage scheme. I'm still lobbying the government for a scrappage scheme. One of the negotiations with the government, one of the things we were lobbying for, is to give London the same sort of support they've given to Birmingham, Bristol and other cities with their clean air zone. So it's not a surprise to me that we're talking about a scrappage scheme, because we had a scrappage scheme in the central London congestion zone ULEZ area.
So I mean, but to be clear, I'm reading from the report. The report here, these aren't my words. This report that goes to your senior members of staff talks about the announcement, alongside the announcement of the new scrappage fund. That's what it says here. And wouldn't you agree that suggesting that a scheme is in place and ready to be announced earlier if desired, which is what it says here in the paperwork, that can provide further evidence, and people might think that you had predetermined the ULEZ expansion before the consultation was finished, which is why there was a scrappage scheme ready to go, and it was just waiting on timing to brief about that scheme. An email from Alex Williams. An email from Alex Williams on the 18th of July says, and a lot of these, they're heavily redacted, so I'm picking what I can from these reports. An email on the 18th of July to your Deputy Mayor Seb Dance under the title Consultation Update says the number of responses received for the consultation is 35,161 as of the 14th of July. A snapshot of responses received so far and stakeholder activity is provided. Note, we are also seeing Sarah Brown, who's your Director of Communications, this week, and we will update her on the additional work we discussed at our last one-to-one with the Commissioner. So here we see again evidence that your Director of Communication is being regularly briefed on the TfL consultation on ULEZ as it's going along. And you're telling me that at no point did your Director of Communications brief you? No. There was no communication with your Deputy Mayor, with your Director of Communications, who was receiving essentially weekly updates.
I think it's important that I'm clear. The first time I saw the final report was on the 18th of November. I can't be clearer.
So further concern was raised when I saw an email from the 22nd of July. Again, this is going to members of your team. It says here that we now have 39,000 responses. The campaigns appear to be having a positive impact, and there is a slight swing in percentages supporting the scheme. This is again another email with the title ULEZ Consultation Weekly Summary Reports. And this went to, we've got the list here, we've got Shirley Rodriguez, who's one of your deputy mayors, Seb Dance, who's one of your deputy mayors, David Bellamy, who's your chief of staff, Richard Watts, who's your deputy chief of staff, and, as I said, Sarah Brown, who's your director of communications. It talks about the 39,000 responses. What do you think was meant when they said it was having a positive impact?
I'm not sure. I wasn't privy to that email.
Well, what do you suspect they meant when they said that it was having a positive impact?
Well, I suggest you write to them and ask them.
So you want me to write to your deputy mayor, Shirley Rodriguez, your other deputy mayor, Seb Dance, your chief of staff, David Bellamy, your deputy chief of staff, Richard Watts, and your director of communications to ask them what they meant?
That would be the way to get a clear answer, rather than this smokescreen to take away from the substance, which is your opposition to the expansion of ULEZ and our attempts to clean the air in London. And that's all this is, a smokescreen. So at no point did they brief you on these weekly reports that they were having. At this point, the opposition to this scheme stands at 64%. And a briefing on the 2nd of August first talks about fair fuel. And it states that there are 4,387 opposition emails that have come in from that organisation. It also talks about 3,007 emails from Possible, who were a group that were named earlier. Were you aware of Possible, and were they working with your office or with an extension of your office? No, I wasn't aware of Possible.
So they weren't working with your office or any consultants that were working with your office, individuals like Ollie Lord, people like that?
I wasn't aware.
An email on the 5th of August, which is again another weekly consultation summary report. These are weekly reports updating your senior staff on the process of the consultation. And this is from Christina Calderoto. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It says that 5,267 emails, including those from Fairfield, were not going to be counted. Did you know about that?
No, but I've since the publicity you sought to generate, asked for an explanation, which I can give you if you want it.
So did you know about those responses being removed at that point? This is an email on the 5th of August.
No, I didn't. I wasn't aware about this. I don't accept the way you've described that, so that's why I was trying to explain it. But if you don't want to, that's fine.
So it's not the way I've explained it. The email says this number does not include the 5,267 campaign emails.
Do you want me to explain
that's what it says here.
You said no, and so I'm saying to you, if you don't want me to explain it, that's fine. But I can't explain this, but I wasn't aware of this.
Of October, I asked you if all campaign groups were being treated the same. You said you were waiting to see what TfL said. Considering that email in August that went to those senior people, your Deputy Mayor Shirley Rodriguez, your Deputy Mayor Seb Dance, your Chief of Staff David Bellamy, your Deputy Chief of Staff Richard Watts, and your Director of Communication Sarah Brown, you are asking us to accept that you had no knowledge of those results being removed.
So we've just agreed. You don't want me to explain the explanation I've been given, but I'll just repeat in that case that the results of the consultation were presented to me in a report to the Mayor on the 8th of November this last year.
The 8th of November, as you've said.
18th.
When we go further into that report, we have a look at some other email responses that were sent in. From the London Cycling Campaign, we see there's 1,577 emails. They were supporting your ULEZ extension, and those emails were included in the final results. We see Possible. They sent in 4,324 emails that were supportive of your ULEZ expansion, and they were included in the final results. From Action Network, we see another 701 responses, and they're supportive of your ULEZ expansion, and they are included in the final results. With Fair Fuel, we see 4,725 responses not supporting your ULEZ expansion, and they are not included in the final result. Do you think that's fair?
Well, if the questioner gives me time, I can explain this, but I'm in his hands. He seems to be just reading a list of questions without waiting for the answer. I'm not sure what you want me to do.
So you don't think it's fair?
I think you should answer the question that's been asked of you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, the explanation I've been given from TfL is all organised responses were received by email and were shared with AECOM for analysis as part of the consultation. The types of organised responses received fell into one of three categories: a statement of support, which was the same text for all of the organised responses received. There were 554 email responses from supporters of Live in Streets, which fell into that category. A statement of opposition, which was the same text for all of the organised responses received. The 4,726 email responses from supporters of Fair Fuel UK fell into that same category. A statement of support and answers to a selection of consultation survey questions in the close part of the consultation. And the following responses fell into this category, which were 1,581 emails from supporters of the London Cycling Campaign, 705 emails from supporters of the Friends of the Earth Network, and 4,312 emails from supporters of wearepossible.org. Fair Fuel Campaign was represented in the final report to me on which I based my decision.
So the Fair Fuel responses were removed from the final results. The groups whose responses were accepted, do you know if they were part of the 12 NGO groups that your Director of Communications met with and was discussed on that emergency meeting in July?
I'm not, Chair, but as I've explained on a number of occasions, the Fair Fuel Campaign was represented in the final report to me on which I based my decision.
And that final report you saw on the 18th of November. Do you recall telling me on the 13th of October that you had not been briefed on any of the results at all?
The final results I received on the 18th of November.
I was very... if you recall, I asked the question a number of times in a number of different ways. So I also talked about ongoing results, results during the process, after the process. I came at it every which way I can. Do you remember how many times I asked you if you've been briefed on those results?
I think it began by... The question was, did I receive any updates between the consultation opening and the consultation closing? And I didn't receive any updates in between those dates. There was a working summary of the progress on the consultation presented to me in a meeting I had with the Commissioner. We discussed many other things during that meeting, TfL funding, industrial relations, TfL board. But what's quite clear, I've asked my office to check, is that document on the slide states this document reflects ongoing work and discussions within TfL and is not intended to reflect or represent any formal TfL or GLA views or policy. So there was a working summary of the responses, which was not the final results which I received on the 18th of November.
So you weren't briefed on the ongoing results of the consultation, but you had, what did you call it, a working summary of what those results were?
It's a working summary of the progress.
Of the results?
No, they are the working summary of the progress on the consultation responses.
An email to the Deputy Mayor, Seb Dance, on the 2nd of September provides an update on the ULEZ consultation and says that a ULEZ consultation update will go to the Mayor on the 20th of September. That's the 20th of September. Do you recall telling me on the 17th of November that you'd not been briefed on the results?
The first time I saw the final results was on the 18th of November in the report that was presented to me, which I explained was a lever arch file.
On the 17th of November, do you recall the Deputy Mayor telling me that he had not been briefed on the results?
Well, I only got the results the day after that, so it would be the next day I got the results. So he may not have seen the results.
He said categorically a number of times that he had not been briefed on the results.
Well,
so
it doesn't surprise me because the results were presented to me the next day on the 18th of November.
So I have a pack here from the 6th of September. It's called the London-wide ULEZ Road User Charging Consultation Results, briefing for the Deputy Mayor for Transport on the 6th of September, which I think we'll agree is before the November date. In that briefing that went to the Deputy Mayor on the 6th of September, we see a connection between the ULEZ expansion and the MTS revision, despite later assertions that the two were not linked. We also see a timetable which sets out when your official decision is due to be taken. And this timetable says that your official decision will be taken on the 24th of November, which it was. And this is from a briefing in September. So is that just a coincidence?
Chair, the member's asking me, the decision maker, questions about what the Deputy Mayor knew or didn't know. I simply don't know the answers.
So in this timetable, at the back of your Deputy Mayor's briefing, where it says a decision will be taken on the 24th of November, a week after the London Assembly meets to discuss the MTS, is it simply a coincidence that this timetabled date which was set out in late August, early September, is exactly the date that you took the decision. Is that just a coincidence, or were you aware of that 24th of November decision date?
I'm not surprised at all. There is a timeline for these decisions to be made. There should be. I'd be disappointed and annoyed if City Hall TfL weren't working on a timeline of when the consultation is, when it goes to the consultants to analyse, when it comes to me, and consequences on what decisions I take. Of course you've got to work on timelines. It'd be ridiculous.
So when you came to the Assembly to discuss the MTS, the changes to the MTS on the 17th of November, were you aware that a date had been set that next week for a decision?
No.
Despite the fact that it was in the timetable.
The language I may have used was, we're going to make a decision shortly, and I think I gave a commitment to try and do it this side of Christmas, which I did.
An email to Seb Dance on the 13th of December under consultation update says, today's presentation provides a summary of the key findings from the consultation and the next steps. A further email dated on the 14th of September shares ULEZ consultation slides for the Mayor. So these are the final results deck for the Mayor. And these were seen by, again, your Deputy Mayor Shirley Rodriguez, your Deputy Mayor Seb Dance, your Chief of Staff David Bellamy, your Deputy Chief of Staff Richard Watts, and your Director of Communications Sarah Brown. This was done in preparation for your briefing, Mr. Mayor, which you had on the 29th of September. Do you recall that 29th of September briefing?
No, but as I said, I understand from checking there was a working summary of the progress that had been made in the consultation responses, and it was one of a number of items that was discussed on that day, including TfL funding, industrial relations, the TfL board, and any other business.
So the London 1 ULEZ and road user charging consultation results briefing for the Mayor, which is the 29th of September, not the 8th of November. You might want to review that. And in that briefing, you saw the results of the consultation. You were briefed on the inner and outer London responses. You learnt of the deleted 5,000 responses from Londoners. On the last page of the briefing, we see a clear connection between the MTS and the London-wide ULEZ decision. In fact, in an email which notes down some of the conversation you had, it says the responses to the consultation, including from London boroughs, the results for representative polling and the proposed mitigations were seen by the Mayor. He was content with the approach for the proposed mitigations. So you were briefed on the results, you were briefed on actions that were going to happen after the decision, which was timetabled, was taken. It was also noted that the changes to the Mayor's transport strategy had to be laid before the London Assembly, which is an assertion we made on the day that it came up. All of these things that are in this briefing that you received on the 29th of September, you denied when I asked you about them in October, just a few weeks later. So, Mr. Mayor, my question is, why did you not tell the Assembly the truth?
The questions you asked are quite clear. The questions you asked were in relation to my involvement during the consultation period, and I was quite clear then, and I'm quite clear now that I wasn't involved in any updates during the consultation period, opening or closing. What you're talking about is a working summary of the progress that's been made in the consultation response, and my understanding is that's a snapshot of the work in progress, but also my understanding is the documents that you're talking about quite clearly say on every single page, and I quote, this document reflects ongoing work and discussions within TfL and is not intended to reflect or represent any formal TfL or GLA views of policy. It definitely isn't, as you've asserted, results. The results were presented to me in a report on the 8th of November, and that report included the final full analysis of the consultation responses. Those are the results, not as you're asserting a working summary on the 29th of September.
Isn't it quite clear from these documents that have been released that senior members of your team were taking weekly updates on the results as they came in from the consultation? Isn't it clear from what we've read in these documents that when the consultation was going in a direction that was negative to your predetermined route to expand ULEZ, money was spent, considerable money was spent, using external agencies to target groups that you thought would get more positive responses? Is it not the case that when responses came in from Londoners that did not take the consultation in the direction that you wanted, a reason was found to remove those results? Isn't it clear that you, the Deputy Mayor, your Chief of Staff, your Deputy Chief of Staff and your Director of Communications, who were involved in this all the way through, kept a very close eye on this consultation and tried to move it to a place where you wanted it, to expand the ULEZ zone, because that's been the intention, and the consultation was just a sham and there was never any intention to listen to Londoners.
Well, this 15-minute period of 20-minute period of questions with very little chance of answers is the best example of the smokescreen, because the Conservatives, Chair, are embarrassed about their opposition to policies to clean up the air in our city. They've been opposed since the beginning of the ULEZ, and they're opposed now. I'm quite clear. I, as the decision maker, decided to have a consultation, not a referendum. I, as the decision maker, read the final report for the first time on Friday the 18th of November. That had everything in it that was needed for me, the decision maker, to make a decision, including the full analysis of the consultation responses, wide information for my consideration, public health data, London-wide polling data and recommendations. And what you've seen over the last 30 minutes is hot air from the Conservatives, embarrassed at their position, and I'm afraid it's another example why they're not fit to hold office.
Mr. Mayor, you can't wish away the fact that you were briefed on the results throughout the consultation. You can't wish away the fact that certain responses were deleted because they didn't conform to the direction you wanted it to go. You can't wish away that the decision date was set in stone months before it was taken, despite you denying it. You can't wish away the fact that when you were asked direct questions, you did not answer them with complete factual exactitude. Mr. Mayor, the right thing to do here, because you've been caught, is to stop this expansion, is to look again at the consultation, is to listen properly to Londoners and respond to what they're telling you. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, is that a question? Yeah, I think, Chair. I think the member has spent weeks preparing. He deserves an answer. And the answer is this: every year in our great city, more than 4,000 people die prematurely because of the poison in our air. Every year in our great city, there are children who develop stunted lungs forever because of the poison in our air. Every year in our great city, there are thousands of Londoners developing asthma, and many more developing cancer, dementia, heart disease, directly attributable to the poor quality air. There are members of this Assembly who want to do something about that to clean up the air. The ultra-low emission zone is a world-leading policy to clean up our air, and there are Conservatives on this Assembly supported by vested interest groups who are opposed. And what you've seen this morning, and what you see on some of their social media, is smokescreen. Londoners will not be fooled by it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Assemblymember Hirani wants to come in on the same topic.
Thank you, Chair. London has some of the most polluted air in the country, and children, including those that were here in the chamber a moment ago, are 4 times more likely to attend a school with air that exceeds WHO air quality guidelines than their peers in the rest of England. Do London's children deserve to grow up with stunted lungs due to air pollution?
Well, look, the thing is, what's quite clear is, I'm quite clear in the language I use. Conservatives on the Assembly do not care about those children. Why do I say that? Because when you see where these air quality monitors are in Bromley, they're in the Princess Royal Hospital, 21.6 micrograms per cubic metre. Look at Bexley, Brampton Primary School Academy, Pearswood Primary School, Bexley, 28.2 micrograms per cubic metre average NO2. So I'm quite clear and I'm quite direct about this, Senator Hirani. The Conservatives clearly do not care about our children developing permanently stunted lungs, and clearly do not care about the premature deaths in our city directly attributable to air quality, because they're in the pockets of vested interest.
Thank you. And you mentioned some of the...
Chair, I'd like to have a point of personal explanation. I won't sit here and accept that. You've said the Conservatives on the Assembly. You have said the Conservatives on the... No, the Mayor has said the Conservatives on the Assembly do not care about the air quality that children breathe. You are saying that I do not care about the air quality that my children breathe.
I'm the chair and you make comments through me. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? Do you hear that? No, I will chair it, and I'm chairing it, and I'm chairing it. You have a right to come in if you want to. The way you do it is by putting your hand up and not coming in when you want to. There's a process. I reminded you when we started, there's standing orders. The year may have changed, but standing orders are the same. And I'm putting you in warning, right, that you should do so to come through the chair. Anyone who speaks has a right to speak. You have a privilege to speak here. Londoners are watching you. I am the Chair of Assembly. You can speak, but there's a process for it, please. Come through to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I make a point of personal explanation?
Hang on, there's a way of doing it. And I don't think Assembly Member Hirani had finished yet. Have you finished yet? No. So can you please carry on, Assembly Member Hirani?
Thank you. And moving from London's children to London's elderly population, who are also more vulnerable to the impacts of air pollution, indeed highlighted by some of the figures that you've also mentioned today in those London boroughs. Does London's elderly population, especially in outer London, deserve to have their lives also cut short by air pollution?
Well, you know from being a hard-working member of the Assembly and where you are, it's older people in London who suffer also dire consequences because of the poor quality air. A larger percentage of older Londoners live in outer London, and so when you look at the numbers of people with illnesses attributable to air pollution, a large proportion are in outer London. And so the figures I read out in relation to the premature deaths, it should be no surprise Bromley's top of the league table, Barnet comes a close second because of the older populations in those boroughs. So these policies will be helping those older Londoners.
Okay. Assemblymember Garrett, please.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point of personal explanation. I don't know.
There's no one was mentioned here. You can come if you want to. I will call you upon you, Assembly Members.
No, I don't want to. But they've said what our
hang
on.
Everyone is making assertions of views. You're able to express your views quite eloquently. The Mayor is able to answer the question very eloquently. I want you to do this sensibly. I will call you in if you want to make a comment, you want to pick something up. You have a right to do so.
No, I'd like the Secretariat's view on that, whether the Mayor can say that we have views. And
I don't need a Secretariat view on this matter. I need my own views. I'm the Chair of the Assembly and I make the decisions. Now, I'm asking Assemblymember Garrett to come in, please.
I'll write to you after the meeting then, Chair.
Let me just tell you, any member is able to write in to the monitoring officer about the behaviour of any other member and we'll take it off from that way. I'm absolutely delighted if you would do that. Thank you. Assemblymember Garrett.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points. I mean, we've just heard there the well-rehearsed case for ULEZ, which we've heard many times over the last year from the Mayor. Very rarely the case against, which of course is consistent with someone who has a predetermined view on the matter. I'm just interested in your discussion with Assemblymember Fortune. I have here the transcript of the 13th of October. Assemblymember Fortune says, Mr. Mayor, at any point did you sit down and have a meeting and somebody said, these are the results that we have at the moment? Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, no. That's what you said on the 13th of October. Was that correct?
The context is the questions up above. You've got to read the transcript from up above. Which
I have the whole transcript here. Is it correct on the 13th of October that no one had given you the results so far?
So I'm quite clear. During the consultation period, which is what the question was about.
No, on the 13th of October, had you had the results so far? You're trying to answer a different question, and I know why, but had you, by the 13th of October, had a briefing on what the results were so far?
So, as I said, Chair, the question began from the member in relation to my knowledge during the consultation period, the opening and closing. And that was the context of my answers in relation to my involvement in the consultation, opening and closing. I'm also quite clear. The first time I saw the final results was on the 18th of November. It is the case that there was a working summary, not the results. A working summary is one of many items discussed with me as the Mayor in a regular meeting. I have regular meetings with the Commissioner. In one of those meetings, there was a working summary given to me. Okay. They were not the results. As I've said, they were a snapshot.
Okay, well, firstly, the context of Assemblymember Fortune's question is very clear because he opens his question with the words, at any point. At any point did you see the results? And we know you did. So this is the document that you're talking about. And just so that everyone is clear with the accuracy of the information being supplied by the Mayor, the title of the document is London-wide ULEZ, MTS and road user charging consultation results, briefing for the Mayor, 29th of September 2022. That's the document you're referring to, yes, which you say is not consultation results.
Chair, I'm quite clear that the results of the consultation were presented to me on the 18th of November. I didn't receive any updates during the consultation period, opening and closing. But as I've said, there was a working summary of the progress as part of a meeting I have with the Commissioner.
That's a very carefully crafted line, Mayor, that you've repeated now. We've heard it several times. This document, which you actually received it about 3 weeks before because the meeting was delayed due to the morning period, has all the results. It's got bar charts, it's got pie charts, we've got line graphs, we've got tables, we've got breakdowns of results, we've got everything. All the results, weeks after the consultation, were given to you on the 29th of September, weren't they?
Well, the member needs to compare and contrast the Lever Arch file with the final report that I received on the 8th of November with the working summary.
You're getting confused about dates. You keep saying the 8th of November, you mean the 18th, but that's not correct, is it? It was the 29th of September.
I think what the member needs to do is compare and contrast the Lever Arch file I received on the 18th of November with the working summary he has in his hands, not just in relation to the number of pages involved in the final report, but also what the final report says versus the working summary, but also the paragraph that will even be on the working summary that says on every single page, this document reflects ongoing work and discussions within TfL and is not intended to reflect or represent any formal TfL or GLA views of policy. It certainly isn't results.
Indeed, it represents ongoing work, which is why when you were asked on the 13th of October, has anyone given you the results so far, you should have said yes, but you didn't. And I think Londoners will reach their own conclusion about how clear and honest the Mayor was in his answers. Thank you, Chair.
I was quite clear then, Chair, as I am today, that I didn't receive any updates, nor did I ask for them, between the consultation opening and the consultation closing. And it's quite clear.
The question was at any time, and I think we know exactly why the Mayor wants to pretend that the words at any time were not in that question. And it's highly inconvenient, but I think we have explored this sufficiently. Thank you,
You've asked a question, the Mayor's going to answer it now.
And it's quite clear.
What was my question, Chair?
And it's quite... Well,
because it wasn't a question. I have not asked a question, Chair. I have said, I think that Londoners will form their own conclusion. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my questions.
No. The question you asked was that the Mayor keeps getting confused, right, about the date, right, and he's going to answer it now.
You shouldn't blush, Neil.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to answer the question?
I certainly do want to answer the question because it was a question. This is Mayor's question time. This isn't the Conservative social media Twitter piece. And the point is this. The point is this. The Conservatives are clutching at straws here now, and this desperation has been seen through by Londoners.
Thank you. The next Assembly member who wants to come in on this topic is Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Yep, just morning. So I wanted to come in on, I wasn't going to, but I wanted to come in on the whole question of the consultation. We've heard a lot of talk about it this morning from a couple of Conservative members, and there's, from my view, there's very little substance. There's a lot of talk and a lot of very clever sounding questions, but very, very little substance that seems to be based on the idea that doing a consultation means putting out a question and then doing nothing to ensure people respond. The idea that a Director of Comms would not be involved in making sure people respond is bizarre. And just wanted to say that I am absolutely committed to effective consultation, and that means making sure it is representative. And the reason I'm coming in is we've had, certainly in the Labour group this morning, quite a lot of emails about the ULEZ specifically, and absolutely they're cut and paste, as we discussed, and absolutely fine with campaign groups using this tool. It's perfectly legitimate. The emails start with, what justification have you got to disregard my right to make an informed opinion on the ULEZ? Which again, perfectly reasonable question. However, when you look at these emails, which reference Fair Fuel UK, perfectly legitimate campaign group, the vast majority are not from London. And when I say the vast majority, this is ridiculous. We've had 141 so far this morning. 15 of those are from London. 15. Now, a fair amount a reasonable amount, are from places bordering London, which I think is legitimate. But we have Hull, we have Stockport, we have Glasgow, we have a vast selection of places in the Birmingham and East Midlands area, Cardiff, Plymouth, couple of my favourite places, St Ives on the Norfolk coast, lovely, Isle of Wight, Liverpool, Inverness. Now, Mr Mayor, my question is, do you think, here's my question, this is my background. Just to explain. I don't know whether you've had the emails. You may have. Do you think it's legitimate to take steps to ensure that those most affected by decisions in London have the biggest say?
Well, can I just say thank you for the preamble, which is really important, because we've got to have sympathy, because some members of the Conservative group and their researchers have spent days, weeks, think they've got a gotcha moment, and I don't want to use words that start with B and end with ox in relation to what it really is, but it's nonsense, because what you have is a situation where you've exposed what this is about. This is about charlatans, vested interests, Conservative members of the Assembly, all agreeing that the status quo is acceptable. And that's what it's about. It's about status quo versus change for the better. And I think it's important for Londoners to have their say, particularly those who in the past have been underserved and feel underrepresented. And it's really important that we don't have this situation where people are hard to reach. They're underserved. And whatever steps we can take to reach out to them, we should do so. In London, not in other parts of the country. They've got MPs to do that, as we saw in Parliament yesterday.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper wants to come in too, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And Mr Mayor, we've heard a lot this morning about consultation and material being hidden. And we've also heard a little bit about factual exactitude, and I don't remember your predecessor being famous for that, either in this place or in a place that he seems to be in at the moment. What I want to ask you about, though, is about revealing information and hiding information, which seems to be a bit of a topic from some people here. And I seem to remember when I first arrived in 2016 that there was a report that had been hidden by the previous mayor that talked about the appalling impact of toxic air quality on children in various parts of our city. Do you remember the people who've been talking so extensively this morning about hiding things and ignoring things, ignoring that report themselves?
I could name every single one of Boris Johnson's cheerleaders and their hypocrisy, but the worry is they then argue that's a reason for personal explanation. Let's be frank, all of the Tories in this group are that line Johnson's biggest fans, right? And he was the man who hid a report that showed there were hundreds of schools in our city in areas where the air was unlawful, which we published soon after I became mayor. And the report I received on the 18th...
You published, Mr Mayor.
Quite. And the report I received on the 18th of November, the Lever Arch file, has also been published for everyone to see.
So do you think it would be fair for some of my constituents and Londoners to conclude that there are some people in this chamber who just don't care about the health of children?
Well, there's a number of things your constituents may conclude, me being one of them. One is they're opposed to cleaning the air in our city, but also they're hypocrites.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think that's a pretty fair description.
Assemblymember Hall.
I'm amazed that you let some of these comments go, Chair.
Hypocrite.
First of all, you made an assertion, Mr Mayor, that the Conservatives don't care about the health of children. You are wrong. So let's get that clear to start with. We do care about children. We do care about health. We also do care about what our residents are saying, and they are telling us loud and clear they do not want the ULEZ in outer London. Now, what do you think it does for politicians when they do a consultation? You have all the evidence of how it was clearly, some have been saying, manipulated. How do you think people feel about that? The one that is putting up the smoke screen, Mr Mayor, is you. So listen loud and clear. Londoners in outer London do not want the ULEZ extended. So listen loud and clear to that and stop referring to all the other rubbish that you do. This is the fact. This is what we're being told through our emails. And don't you dare ever tell us who we want to protect and who we don't. We do care about children, and take that on board.
Assemblymember Hall, was there a question there, please? Why?
It's just
Why?
pathetic.
Because you want
It's
a video
just pathetic. Let's be frank. It's
No,
pathetic.
there wasn't a question in there. You let your group get away without asking
hang on.
questions. No,
Hang on.
let me
Assembly-Member
answer
Hall.
your question.
Assembly-Member Hall.
And so that's what I did.
I have been allowing your group also to go for a half-an-hour question right without interruptions, setting up a preamble.
Because they're asking questions.
Hang on. This is Mayor's question time.
I know.
And if they don't ask questions, I don't want public statements here. You can do that outside the Mayor's question time.
Consider it a statement.
Can I get a chance to respond? Well,
look. Hang on. Look, let me please chair this way, okay? I'm quite capable of making decisions. Let me tell you, I'm quite capable. I want to remind people that if you don't ask questions, then don't take part in this session. There are other forums to do that, and fora. And the other thing is, when you make statements, I look upon them as questions. The people in London want to hear what the Mayor has to say about these issues, because you can't just make statements and expect the Mayor not to be answered, and I think that'd be unfair to the Mayor. But I do expect the Mayor to give a very concise answer, please, to be very succinct in the answer, please.
Chairman, can I just say, if the Mayor makes an incorrect assertion about what we care about and what we don't care about, it needs to be put right. Not with a question, but with a statement. And I made a statement making it quite clear that the Conservatives do care about children, and that it is completely incorrect for the Mayor to say that we don't.
Okay, I do just want to remind the members also, look, we need to be respectful of each other. I do want to, we don't have standing orders like in Parliament of bad unparliamentary language. But we do have one thing here. We have the chair. Here, the decision of the chair on these matters is the final authority. If there are comments being made which you are unhappy about, you have right. Any member has right to write to the monitoring officer about issues. But I just want you to be temperate, right, in your language, to be respectful, to be aware of the dignity of this assembly, to recognise that we are the government of London, and Londoners expect us to be respectful to each other. So I ask you to self-discipline yourself, please, in this matter. I know things are exciting. You are passionate about the thing which you feel about, and that's all right. And Mr. Mayor, I do want you to make you have the opportunity to say something.
Just a short point, Chair.
Thank you.
Just a short point. Look, let's be frank. History shows the Conservatives opposed the introduction of the Central London ULEZ when I introduced it. They opposed the expansion of the ULEZ to Inner London when I introduced it. And now they're exposing the expansion of ULEZ to all of London. They've been consistent in their opposition to policies to clean up the air in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, Boff.
A member earlier accused other members of being hypocrites. I think either the member should withdraw that or name the people who she thinks are hypocrites.
Hang on. It wasn't you, Mr. Mayor, who said that. It was member Cooper said that. Do you want to withdraw your comment?
No, the Mayor said. I asked a question of the Mayor, and the Mayor said, yes, you could say that some people could be seen to be hypocrites, but it wasn't actually me that said that people were hypocrites.
We'll have a look at the tape. If the Assembly member is saying she didn't use the words that she used, then I'll accept that.
Okay, can we now carry on, please, to something completely different? Can we carry on? Okay. I think in the excitement of the moment, I forgot that we do want a comfort break. I am about to say, let's have a comfort break for 10 minutes, and we'll come to simply a completely different topic. 10 minutes, please. Welcome, Assembly. We will carry on now on a totally different topic. Assembly Member Umesh Desai's question on the priorities for policing.
Thank you, Chair. The Peel report outlines several areas of improvement for the Metropolitan Police Service. These include the MPS improving how it responds to the public within its emergency call handling procedure, its use of data, and how it can better support victims of crime. The report also said the MPS should improve its understanding of resources and workforce capabilities. My Police and Crime Plan prioritises effective response and investigation, victim and witness care, trust and confidence, public protection and protection of young people. These are areas where His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue, HMICRFRS, has also identified the need for focus. To support and oversee the changes needed, in addition to our normal oversight, my Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, and MOPAC Chief Executive Diana Lutchford attend the monthly MPS Turnaround Board, and I attend the HMICFRS Police and Performance Oversight Group with the Commissioner and my Deputy Mayor. Sir Mark Rowley is committed to being a reforming Commissioner and consistently reiterates his plan to deliver more trust, less crime and high standards. He's clear the MPS must change to better serve our communities and its own officers and staff. Sir Mark's notable successes so far include establishing the Anti-Corruption and Abuse Command. Since September, there have been 38 arrests made internally to counter corruption and abuse. The refreshed Integrity Line has already received 29 reports in 8 days, which is a clear improvement against an historic 20 per month. And Project Tenacity has also made a significant impact on the number of outstanding suspects and offenders, with 1,700 criminal suspects arrested in just 6 weeks. The MPS has also arrested more than 2,500 offenders and also doubled attendance at domestic burglaries to almost 80%.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I had 3 supplementaries, but you more or less answered my supplementaries. But nonetheless, I'll still ask a couple of questions. So, talking of the Peel report, a very specific area was the inspector's criticism of the way that the police investigate crime. We know that the quality of police investigation is very important in delivering justice and tackling crime. So how are you working with the Commissioner to ensure that sergeants, inspectors, who form the bedrock of sort of frontline policing, in terms of supervising PCs, are able to provide support to officers undertaking investigations?
Yeah, this is a really important question because, as you know, we've lost a lot of experienced officers and we've got a high number of inexperienced newer officers. So what we're doing is, in the budget I've announced for next year, there'll be more support for the police in better supervision, better training and outside assistance as well. Supervision, standards and leadership will be key priority going forward.
Yeah, I think this is something the Commissioner, when he made the speech last week, talked about, that is actually trust and confidence is going to be revealed from the bottom up. When do you expect the Met to be moved out of the engage process?
Well, look, it took Greater Manchester 2 years. I don't want us to take that long. The key thing is to make sure this is more than box ticking. We have a sustainable approach to make sure we have changes that are permanent rather than just simply ticking a box. So it will take as long as it takes, but Sir Mark and Dame Lynn are working incredibly hard with a good team around them now.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Finally, you already talked about Operation Tenacity, which I was going to ask you about, targeting London's worst and most prolific offenders. I've got to say, their work has been very impressive. They have certainly been very tenacious in terms of arresting 2,500 prolific offenders. I commend them. Thank you.
I'll pass that on. Thank you for that. That's very kind.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember McCartney on ending violence against women and girls in London.
Sorry, Chair. Are we skipping over some of Garrett's questions?
Some of the questions have been withdrawn.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I'm appalled by the tragic and senseless murder of Zara Elena. My deep condolences and thoughts remain with Zara's family and loved ones. No, not enough is being done to identify and tackle action against men with a history of violence against women and girls. We must do more to tackle violent offenders who are intent on harming women and girls. We must improve the way problematic behaviour is identified, recorded and managed. During my mayoralty, I've secured over £18 million investment in programmes addressing perpetrator behaviour, such as DRIVE, a multi-agency approach to high-harm perpetrators of domestic abuse. My GPS tagging initiative for domestic abuse offenders has been vital in detecting non-compliance, further offending and increased risk to victims. Evidence shows that this can support practitioners to better manage high-risk offenders. I've overseen more than £4 million investment in prevention activities that challenge incorrect perceptions about what is acceptable behaviour in relationships or in public. This includes £1 million to embed a new violence against women and girls prevention toolkit in every secondary school in London, building on the success of the award-winning Have a Word campaign encouraging men to call out misogynistic behaviour. The Commissioner has assured me that targeting the 100 most dangerous predatory men in London using the best science available will be his focus. In his first 100 days, the MPS arrested 153 rape suspects. The MPS also achieved their largest decrease in the number of arrest warrants for wanted offenders, with reductions of 30.7% for domestic abuse offenders and 4.5% reduction for violence against women offenders. My Office for Policing and Crime, my Violence Reduction Unit and our criminal justice partners are determined to drive improvements from prevention to investigation to sentencing. It's critical that we look across the criminal justice system to learn the lessons from this tragic case, to reduce the risk of further cases in the future. I recognise that there is more still that can be done. I will be looking to discuss the best way to do that at a forthcoming London Criminal Justice Board. It's my priority to do everything I can to make London a safe place where women and girls are safe and feel safe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The recent report from Operation Soteria Bluestone found that when women presented to the police with allegations of violence, that actually many forces, including the Met, were not carrying out checks to see if previous allegations had been made against those suspects. So, for example, of those that were reported, approximately half had previously had criminal histories for a range of offences, and a quarter had actually a history of sexual offending. Why are these checks not happening, and what can you do to ensure that in future the police, particularly the Met, do actually make those checks as routine?
Well, thank you for raising this really important issue. Can I commend publicly the brilliant work Claire Waxman has been doing as a Victims Commissioner for a number of years now, pioneering work that's leading the way across the country. She encouraged the police, 5 forces then followed, to open their books so we could do this piece of work. And you're right, some of what we've discovered is not good, which needs to be rectified. There is now going to be introduced a national operating model which will be available this summer, and that's got to make sure that officers have, an offender-centric approach towards investigations, looking at previous convictions, previous reports, previous allegations made about suspects, which can provide an insight into the behaviour and a pattern of behaviour of that person. And it's a good example of, London leading and other police forces following.
Thank you. And my colleague, Assembly Member Duval, received cross-party support from this Assembly and yourself to lobby the government for a domestic violence register. And I'm pleased to say that the Labour Party said it will introduce such a register. Can I ask, have you been doing further lobbying on that and other preventative steps that will support and reduce violence against women?
Yeah, can I just say, I want to spare his blushes, but when Len Devell was talking about this years ago, you remember the resistance and reasons given why it wasn't possible by the police, right? We were all there for those meetings. I think there's a different approach with this new reforming commissioner. I think there's also the awful cases we've seen over the last 2 years has brought this issue to the fore. My nervousness is that the media caravan may move on and this issue will fall down. We can't allow it to fall down. And that's why it's really important we remember that every 3 days a woman is killed across our country at the hands of a man. Often her name won't be known, it won't get front page attention, it won't get media attention, but that's a preventable death. And that's why I think the idea of a domestic abuse register, domestic violence register, so people are aware of previous behaviour is really important, and that transparency is really important. And I'm really pleased that the Labour Party is now their official policy. We need to persuade the government, with there's still been 20 months potentially to the next election, to make the changes now.
Thank you. And can I just echo, and I think you heard from the room, the support that we have and for the work of Claire Waxman, your Victims Commissioner. Now today she's holding a round table with victims who have been failed by the police and criminal justice service. How important is it that police officers in particular hear those stories, and do you think that will make a difference to how they react?
do you know one of the things that we've tried to get across, and I've tried to get across, is how things are received by people. That could be how, inverted commas, banter is received by women. It could be how the actions of police officers are received by victims and survivors and so forth. And so that victim-centric approach is really important. And, you know, often it's not because of malevolence. It's just sometimes people don't realise the consequences of delay, of action not being taken. And that sort of stuff is really important. Question, does a police officer really need to go through the mobile phone of a victim? Question, no, the answer is no. Question, you know, is the time of day the victim was out, the survivor was out, really relevant? Answer, no, and so forth. And so hearing from the victims themselves is a good way, a non-patronising way of educating people in the CJS who otherwise wouldn't know about these issues.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I understand that Member Duval, you want to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We rightly pay tribute to the work of Claire Waxman, which has been vitally important in terms of highlighting the concerns of what's been going on in this area. And people talk about crime fighters and they automatically think of police officers who play an important role. In this particular, we've also got to think about the CPS. But I do want to mention another person that some of MOPAC and some of the MPA members, if they're old enough to have been around at that time, would mention is Professor Betsy Stanko. We talk about crime fighters. Well, actually, you can be a civilian or a support worker, a non-police officer, and be a crime fighter, and Betsy has made a contribution in terms of dealing with that. In terms of Operation Satoria and some of the work that's been published in December of last year makes for sobering reading. It's quite clear. These wake-up calls have now got to be turned into practical actions. Its conclusions have been accepted by the Home Office. Are you in a position to update us about the MPS plans to take those actions and the findings of this report?
Yeah, so thank you for your comments. I completely echo your comments about Betsy and others who are crime fighters in this area. So there are a number of different areas of work where problems have been identified. The backlog of cases is the issue that really concerns me. Detection rates, also a source of concerns. The court backlogs, massive concern, and lack of decent support for victims and survivors. So with additional investment from City Hall making progress across this areas, we've already started to see an improvement in detection rates, which is crucial in this area. We've invested more money in relation to the digital side and forensics. My big concern, though, of actually all of the CJS are the court backlogs. So if you were to report today, God forbid, a rape or a serious crime, it could be years, even if that person is charged. We talked about improving detection rates. That case reaches trial, and that's an impact on attrition, the trauma you suffer, and so forth. That's why it's really important that we get support from the government to address the issue of court backlogs. Currently, 16,000 cases in backlog. 16,000.
But it's also important we also look at, from the police's point of view, new model ways of investigations, isn't it? We talk about people being innocent until proven guilty. I don't know of any other crimes against women, in particular sex crimes and rapes, where actually the victim has more pressure on them to prove what's happened rather than the perpetrator or potential perpetrator of the crime. So the question is, one of the issues that was highlighted in that independent report was the disproportionate effort that's been put into testing the credibility of the victim's account. And there's a need to rebalance investigations to include thorough investigations of suspect behaviours around that. Now, of course, victim blaming and those issues. I recently had a issue in my constituency. You commented on it. A Bromley Conservative councillor. Not all Conservatives share this particular councillor's view, but tended to blame the victim of a potential incident that occurred in my borough, which was a very serious issue. Now, of course, that deters people from coming forward when we need them to come forward. But also, We know the incidents of the last 24 hours that have been covered in the media will determine whether people think, well, what's this about? If I make the complaint, no one's going to take it seriously, or it's not going to be investigated properly around that. So tell me around what do you think politicians or decision makers can be doing in showing that leadership around those areas of where we can? The work of Claire Waxman is one example, I know that, but what else do you think we could be doing?
It's a really profound issue you raised. Look, I come at this from a number of angles. As a former lawyer, in relation to the adversarial process we have in this country, as Member of Parliament, of course as Mayor, but also as somebody who's got, I'm afraid, people I know who've been victims of this sort of stuff. And victim blaming is still taking place institutionally, I'll come to that in a second, and also in society as well. You know, what time of day did it happen? Why was she out so late? What clothes was she wearing? Why was her skirt so short? Previous relationship history. What's in her mobile phone? And we can go on, right? We all know this. And the reason why it's so important is it could affect the decisions of the police. Joanne referred to this in relation to, you know, when somebody comes in, the CPS when it comes to prosecuting, the judge, a jury. And that's why we've got to start early in relation to education of boys in particular, of course girls as well, in primary school, secondary school, healthy relationships, respect, and so forth. And you're spot on, because historically that's been one of the reasons why conviction rates are so low, because, you know, victims think, what was the point of this? Trauma. And by the way, Len, if you speak to, as I have had the privilege to speak to victims who have gone through the CJS, they will use phrases like, the trial process was as bad, and just think about this, was as bad as the rape. Now just think about that. That's what sometimes victims and survivors have said. That's how traumatic, you know, get involved in prosecution is. And the reason why it's so brave is because that means their evidence has led to that person being found guilty and taken off the streets. So he's no longer a danger to other women. So it's a really brave thing women do by persevering, but there are big challenges. And I think the good news is the government realises the challenge now, and we're trying to work together to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the question on environment and cost of living policies has been withdrawn. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Sheikh on planning for women's safety in the public realm.
Well, Chair, can I thank the member for this question, which is related to the previous question that was asked by Joanne McCartney and Len Duval. Our built environment is important in helping to keep women and girls safe. The murders of Sabina Nessa, Sarah Everard, Zara Elena, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, alongside countless other acts of violence against women, form the backdrop for a range of initiatives we're working on to create a safer London for women and girls. Planning and development processes are central to that response. My London plan aims to ensure that new public space provides a safe and inclusive environment for all Londoners. My Public London Charter supports the implementation of this approach. Research is underway through my Good Growth by Design programme into how design and development processes impact gender safety. My design advocates are working on projects across our city, exploring with partners including TfL and the LLDC how to embed principles of gender safety, such as ensuring meaningful engagement with women, girls and local representative organisations. Lessons from this work will then underpin guidance for the development community and inform my approach to investment and planning decisions. Meanwhile, my London Review panel is mainstreaming gender inclusion into the design review process. Panel members were selected to include expertise in gender safety and inclusive design. Gender representation in the built environment sector is also crucial. My 2019 Supporting Diversity Handbook examined ways to build a more representative sector. Since then, officers have worked with 6 organisations, collectively representing 350,000 members, to establish an action plan for creating an inclusive sector. Representation has been integral to the procurement of my forthcoming architecture and urbanisation framework. Beyond planning, my nighttime strategy supports councils, communities and businesses in creating nighttime plans. Over 1,000 venues and organisations have signed up to my Women's Night Safety Charter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for laying out this absolutely vital work. And I wanted to follow up by asking a little bit about the government's national model design codes in regards to women's safety. So the government's national model design codes makes reference to ensuring safety and security considerations when it comes to designing street layouts and footways. However, there is no specific mention of ensuring design of our cities around women's safety in particular. Now, as you've already stated, this is in contrast to your London plan, where the housing design standards states particular focus should be given to creating spaces that are safer for groups that are more likely to have safety concerns in public spaces, such as women and girls, but also trans and disabled Londoners. So do you think we should be pushing the government to make their national model design codes to be more specific around designing the public realm and in the consideration of women and girls' safety, particularly in the context of planning reforms? And just on that note, my thank you to the Planning and Regeneration Committee for their work on our launch report this week looking at these planning reforms. I think your mic.
Apologies. I think they should go further, but I've always seen them as a floor, not a ceiling. That's the basic minimum that you've got to do. And the advantage of us in London is we've gone above that in relation to what we require in the London plan. But you'll be aware many Londoners travel across the country, right? So why can't, when you go to Manchester or Birmingham, Liverpool, I'm just naming them, not because they're any worse than ours, but if the national policy framework isn't improved and the floor's not raised, then other parts of the country could be, in design terms, less safe than London. So we will carry on being, exemplars in this area, but I think lobbying the government in this area, and now we may have a small window in relation to the government's attention being on this, is the time to do so.
Fantastic, thank you. And also, Mr. Mayor, I think it's worth, whilst we're discussing this, if you were able to draw London's attention to any best practice around the world in terms of how we design our cities. I know that we're leading from that in terms of London, but if there are other cities we can draw best practice from as well.
So there are examples in London. I want to give credit to Barkin, who are involving women in some of the projects they're doing. It's a programme they've called Her Barkin, so they're using women, local women, to advise in relation to some schemes. Sadiq have done some really good work in relation to a women's safety charter that's local women have been fed into, and Croydon Living Streets, to keep it cross-party, have also done some really good work in relation to gender-informed planning guidance. And across the globe, the best example I saw was recently was this photographic project in Oklahoma City, where black women in particular, because you mentioned safety, and you rightly said it's not just women. You mentioned the trans community, but there's also intersectionality. You mentioned disabled, issues around race, and so Oklahoma City did a really good project as well. But we are looking at good examples, and I also encourage you to speak to Jules Pipe about your expertise and advice in relation to some of the leading work we're doing in this area as well. I mentioned in my main answer some of the work we're doing, but I think he'd value your approach in this as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question on planned public transport improvements has been withdrawn. Oh. And the next question is by Assembly Member Moame on exempt accommodation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. I'm very concerned about this issue in the exempt accommodation sector. It's not right that some landlords are taking advantage of the system, leaving vulnerable tenants paying very high costs for accommodation that can damage their health and well-being. This accommodation is exempt from local housing allowance caps on the basis that residents who are often vulnerable are provided with some level of care, support and supervision. Although there are many good exempt accommodation providers, a lack of regulation around the support element means oversight has been inadequate, failing some of the most vulnerable in our society. The increase in poor quality exempt accommodation stems from councils facing long-term challenges to fund and commission support services, which has meant they've increasingly had to rely on non-commissioned exempt accommodation. Despite our strong record on affordable housing delivery, there is still a shortfall of general needs housing, which means exempt accommodation residents are not always able to move on to secure housing. Another key challenge is insufficient data to monitor the sector in London and nationally. As well as quantitative data, qualitative assessments are needed to know how much of the sector is falling below standards. In London, landlords can easily let properties in the private rental sector at rents above the LHA caps, so we believe we have less of an issue with landlords using exempt accommodation systems to make a quick buck than is seen in other parts of the country.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. We had a recent Housing Committee session alongside providers. We had boroughs attending, and just to give you a flavour, we were definitely looking at a broad range of boroughs. So one of my own boroughs, Hackney, attended, as did Kensington and Chelsea, and others, Havering alongside those. But one of the things that Deputy Mayor Tom Copley raised was that there are the
that City Hall has problems encouraging bidders to build the housing that's required because there isn't necessarily the funding alongside that to provide the ongoing support, actual support, as opposed to the money that's being extracted from the housing benefit system at the moment. I wondered if there was a role for City Hall to collect data on some of that non-commissioned housing, which would, I think, help build and identify the case for more, not just more homes within the Affordable Homes programme, but also make the case to government to fund that ongoing support. Without that revenue, it's really impossible for boroughs to provide homes.
I'm really happy, Chair, to ask Tom Copley to go and look into this. I know there are some big challenges in relation to collecting the detailed information about the profile of individual boroughs, but I'm more than happy to ask the team to meet with the Assembly member to discuss if there's a way we can help and add value to councils, notwithstanding the pressure under. But also, I think your point about it being a powerful lobbying tool is the real key, because the data would back up arguments in relation to this potential huge unmet need.
And I raise that. Thank you very much. I raise that point about lobbying. There is a private members' bill which is going through Parliament. I haven't, to be honest, checked this week where it's at, but it has a number of asks around it. One of the issues which has been highlighted by boroughs in London is that there was £20 million allocated for support by the government. None of that money came to London. So alongside supporting the principles of the bill, would you look at, as the Mayor, making sure that we are pushing for adequate funding and our slice of the funding that's available to make sure that people that need support are receiving it? We had heard horrific stories of women who were placed in exempt accommodation who were survivors of domestic abuse, alongside men, which is entirely inappropriate, but there is just nowhere else for them to go. So that money is really, really essential so that those people can rebuild their lives.
It's a powerful point. I did speak to my Deputy Mayor for Housing about this yesterday, because he went to the committee, as you said. I'm more than happy to look into this. As you said, it's an area that's not talked about much, is it? And that's why I was really pleased that your committee looked into this. But, Chair, can I take this away and see what we can do to assist the member and the committee in the work they're doing?
Thank you. The next question on housing has been withdrawn, and the next question is, which we're going to take on, is in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon on tube noise.
Can I thank the member for this question? Tackling tube noise continues to be a priority for Transport for London, the Deputy Mayor Seb Dance, and for me. TfL is committed to addressing areas with high residential and in-carriage noise levels, and is doing everything it can to reduce tube noise with the resources it has across London. Despite the immense financial challenges due to COVID we faced over the last few years, TfL has continued to tackle noise and vibration issues by investing in London Underground's track renewal and maintenance, including a continuous programme of rail grinding and track modernisation. Corrugated rails continue to be the main cause of track noise. TfL's rail grinding programme, which smooths the tracks, is the principal means of addressing the issue and benefits residents by reducing noise issues. Over the past 6 months, TfL has carried out around 14,800 metres of rail grinding to tackle noise and vibration. In addition, where appropriate, TfL also carries out other targeted interventions to reduce noise, such as installing new rail, lifting rails and packing underneath them, and removing rail joints where they're no longer necessary. TfL is also carrying out work to address in-carriage noise, which affects customers and staff while travelling and in stations, by prioritising the removal of a type of track fastening called Pandrel Vanguard. These fastenings, ironically, were installed a number of years ago to address residential noise by limiting how vibrations travel, but resulted in in-carriage noise. TfL is working to ensure that removing these fastenings does not negatively impact residents by carefully addressing each site. Where appropriate, TfL is using an alternative product, Delcor, to reduce noise both on trains and in homes. Works are currently underway on the Central, Northern and Victoria lines and are planned on the Jubilee line later this year. TfL is also trialling other technologies, including softer under-rail pads, to better absorb energy from the passage of trains. TfL uses all tools available to them when looking at ways to mitigate noise, including the implementation of speed restrictions where possible. I know that tube noise is an issue Londoners are concerned about. TfL officials are meeting with members of this Assembly next month to provide an overview of TfL's work to address this issue and an update.
Thank you very much. Between September 2021 and August 2022, there were 775 noise complaints, with many of these concentrated on a number of tube lines. And the sound levels, as you've alluded to, that have been recorded have been equated to being at a rock concert or a plane coming into land. You've listed some of the things that TfL are doing, but do you accept that the current mitigation measures are not enough?
Sorry, do you mean in carriage or residential?
Both.
So let's be frank. There was a pause during the pandemic, and that pause was extended whilst we negotiated with the government to get a financial deal for at TfL. So I mentioned the progress made in the past. Now we've got a financial deal. Not enough. We've got a financial deal we can make more progress, but TfL are as frustrated as residents, and indeed you are, rightly so, by the lack of progress. But it's not through want of trying or technologies. It's been because of the financial situation, which is well rehearsed.
Okay. The latest complaints really show hotspots on the Northern Line around Wimbledon and the Jubilee Line around Canning Town, which is something we all experience as we get the tube to this place. Parts of these lines are so loud they would require hearing protection if they were workplaces. Will you commit for TfL to have a noise hotspot programme this year to tackle head-on the noise on the tube at these locations?
There are engineers who go out proactively to look at where there are issues. So there's track maintenance teams who carry out the visual inspections on a weekly basis. There are hotspots that we are aware of, and when TfL come and meet the Assembly next month, they'll give you an update of those hotspots. The focus, as I said, and you mentioned a couple of them, Jubilee Line, Northern Line, Central Line, in relation to the work that's been undertaken, and that's dictated by you call them hotspots, but the areas where there are big issues. The new phenomenon that wasn't around when we first started speaking about this, I remember Jeanette Arnold and Andrew Dismore raising it as well, was residential concerns.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about the in-carriage stuff that you mentioned, the rock concerts and so forth. And that's why we've got to be cognizant of unintended consequences of some of the things we're doing.
I understand that, but there is a huge issue with residential noise. As you've talked about it impacting passengers. I describe our journey as we travel out here, TfL staff, local residents, and I receive casework from residents who feel that after years of complaining, they need to actually move due to the impact of the noise on their health. And I do think it's just the tip of the iceberg, because lots of us have these problems, but we don't report them. We don't know where to go. And I think TfL perhaps needs to get a better understanding of perhaps the scale of the problem in some places. So will you set up a dedicated online reporting tool on the TfL website to help Londoners more easily report tube noise and to help TfL get a grip on this issue?
Well, it already exists, Chair, so so you can contact the TfL Contact Centre, or you can go to the TfL website where there's a dedicated noise and vibration page, but also there's the main help and contacts page has this. But I think it's really important to set out the context, which is a underground line that's 160 years old, 11 lines, more than 400 kilometres, 272 stations, almost 600 trains, and some lines 40 trains per hour. So it is a high-frequency metro. I think we've got to be honest with Londoners. It will never be silent.
Could it be on the front page of the website to promote
the new lines, the Elizabeth Line and Northern Line extension, are much quieter. I'm more than happy for TfL to speak to the member about making it more identifiable. I'm not going to sit here and redesign the TfL's webpage.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is an opportune moment for me to ask permission from the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with provisions of Standing Order 1.1 in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed. So is the Assembly content with that? Great, thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Russell on nurses and the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. Thanks for this question. The timing couldn't be better. Nurses and other health and social care workers made unthinkable sacrifices during the worst of the pandemic, risking their lives to provide care for people. I want to thank them for their selfless commitment to helping others when they needed it the most. Now they are once again being asked to accept a sharp, real terms pay cut in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Nurses deserve to work in a health service that supports them to their job well and provides them with a good standard of living. When anyone can't afford the most basic necessities, we should be looking at what's gone wrong. The fact that hospital staff are having to use food banks is a shame on our nation. I'm doing all I can to help Londoners deal with these ongoing cost of living pressures. I'm investing more than £80 million this year and a further proposed £80 million next year to help those struggling with the rising cost of living, including £5 million in each year to connect Londoners with financial advice and support. For example, I'm funding a debt-free advice bus to visit over 35 locations across London. The bus stopped at University Hospital Lewisham last week, and more hospital stops are being finalised. I'm investing more than £3.1 million this year to boost the capacity and coverage of advice services in London via the CAB and London Legal Support Trust networks and my Advice in Community Settings programme. This is in addition to the £400 million a year on skills and employment programmes, £43 million Warmer Homes programme, and the £3.46 billion we're investing over the next 4 years on building genuinely affordable homes, with nurses being able to get these homes because of the intermediate housing changes we've made. The government, though, needs to urgently take responsibility for the situation and work with unions to develop a full proposal to provide nurses and other health and care staff with the settlement they deserve.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I agree it's a disgrace that the government has chosen to underpay healthcare workers for years, and that has led to the dire situation in our hospital that our hospitals are facing now, with nurses driven to strike. Now, it's good to hear your support for a pay rise for nurses. I was on the picket line at UCH yesterday morning. They'd really love to see you. And they told me they need every bit of political support they can get. So back in 2019, you published Our Vision for London with various partners, which set a target to increase the nursing workforce by 8,000 people and reduce the nursing vacancy rate by 5%. Now, those targets clearly aren't on track, and instead the London vacancy rate has risen to 15%. That's the highest in the country, and it's contributing to the pressures that our nurses are feeling in hospitals. Now, RCN London tell me that their biggest cost of living pressures are transport and housing, rather than, I mean, you know, the debt advice and everything else is helpful, but transport and housing, and those are things that you can help with. So you announced you'd prioritise affordable housing for key workers, including nurses, in March 2021. What impact has that had on the ground?
So there's a number of issues that are raised there. So firstly, since 2010, when the Conservative and Lib Dems had a budget, there's been a 7-year public sector pay cap. That's meant the average pay of a nurse has fallen by 8% since 2010, 8% cut in their wages. You're right in relation to the issues with nurses' retention. 25% increase in numbers leaving the profession. The number of vacancies, record levels, 47,000. Let's be frank. Housing and transport by themselves are issues, but not enough. You've got to increase the wages of nurses in real terms.
I'm thinking about things you can help with, and transport and housing are two things you can.
So in relation to transport, the first 5 years of me being the mayor, we froze fares that helped nurses. And what we've also done in relation to housing is to have a new scheme for key workers to be able to access the intermediate housing.
So, what my question was I was asking you about the impact on the ground of the housing, of the affordable housing for key workers. You said twice last year it was due for consultation later in 2022, and that hasn't happened. So, you know, Greens, we've been working with the RCN and pushing you on housing for so long. We even put a practical budget proposal to help. But the other area you can make a big impact for nurses is transport. Now, nurses told me yesterday that discounted or free public transport is their #1 ask, just like the police get, to help with the cost of living crisis and keep them in their jobs. Now, you're going through the budget process at the moment. Can't you consider a TfL concession for nurses in your final budget to help deal with the acute workforce crisis?
There's two issues raised in your question, and I know you rushed for time, but you then asked me to respond quickly, and then you... So the firstly is, there has been a consultation, you said that hasn't happened. So we consulted with trade unions, emergency services and local authorities on the list of essential occupations. That's happened. So it's not true to say it's not happened. You then raise the issue of transport fares. You can't wish away the demand the government's made on us to raise £500 million of additional revenues from TfL, or to wish away the fact they've demanded we make a further set of cuts of £700 million over the next 2 years, and also the condition that we raise fares by inflation of 5.9%. We can't wish that away. That's a demand
We can't wish that away, Mr Mayor, but I established last week in Budget Committee that you've got some flexibility in the 5.9% fares increase envelope. You could at least keep the bus fares down, but I'm out of time.
Well, you're not out of time because you've still got 5.5 minutes left, but I understand what you mean. So the Greens have chosen not to pursue this issue. Let's be clear about this. It's not true to say the Greens are out of time.
Okay, Mr Mayor, I think Assemblymember Best want to come in on this question.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, you already referenced your cost of living mobile bus as a means to help. In mayoral decision DD2604, a number of items were listed for what that £145,000 project would pay for. For example, you had debt advisors, which would be £18,000. You also had £10,000 set aside for a celebrity endorsement at the launch event. Can I just ask if that celebrity exists?
So it's not true to say that there was any money spent on any celebrities, Chair, but I did read a press release that nobody took up from the Conservative group in relation to this issue. Another damp squib like their ULEZ charge this morning, I suppose.
Just to confirm, Mr Mayor, that's your mayoral decision that you signed off that said there was £10,000 for a celebrity endorsement at an event. You signed that off. You might not have got someone that wanted to endorse your policies, and I'm not sure how you justify £10,000, but it did exist and you did sign it off. So perhaps, like much in relation to Assemblymember Fortune's questions earlier, perhaps if you read your paperwork more closely, you would have seen that that celebrity endorsement, you did sign that off.
Well, Chair, I think there's a question there, isn't there? I mean, listen, we know that the only celebrities wishing to endorse the Tories are Jim Davidson and people of that ilk. The reality is that we don't think it's a good use of money to have celebrities endorsing the debt-free advice bus. The press release that was issued, and embarrassingly, nobody took up the press release issued by the Conservative group. Again, I feel sorry for those researchers working incredibly hard over the last few months on the direction of their members to do this piece of work. And once even Conservative sporting papers saw the nonsense in the press release, they couldn't be bothered to print it. I'm pleased they read the press release properly and checked.
Thanks, Mr. I'll send him a copy of the paper he signed off. Thanks.
Please do that. Thanks. The next question is in the name of yes. Assemblymember Cooper on the utilities companies' profits.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this question. Londoners will find it odd that water companies are making bumper profits while customers and the environment suffer from their continued poor performance. The public sees water companies, including Thames Water, benefiting from extraordinary financial returns, while London's infrastructure underperforms in resilience and reliability, and Londoners suffer from unacceptable pollution incidents. Last month, a burst water main disrupted supply to over 21,000 households and flooded nearly 40 homes in Camden, causing building movement and subsidence that could take months to address. The rapid freeze and thaw in December resulted in widespread leaks, many of which are still being repaired. It's clear that our water infrastructure is not fit for purpose, let alone resilient to our increasingly frequent climate shocks. We've seen repeated pollution of rivers and canals, with water companies under investigation by Ofwat and the Environment Agency for pollution breaches. Thames Water's own live map of storm discharges show that regular sewage discharges in rivers are part of routine operations, not rare occurrences. Thames Water continues to sit at the bottom of Ofwat's customer satisfaction table. My team have met with Thames Water to discuss plans for infrastructure renewal in London, and I met with Ofwat to ask for tough but fair regulation to support Thames Water's turnaround. I continue to engage with all London's water companies to scrutinise and inform their plans and hold them to account.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Mayor, and you're obviously very aware of what the issues are in relation to water. So would you agree with me that more of the profits being made by Thames Water that are available should be going into leaking pipes all over London and a repair programme? And is that something that Ofwat is willing to support?
Yeah, thanks for your question, and you're spot on. The good news is our lobbying of Ofwat has paid off in relation to their ask of Thames Water, Ofwat's agreed to work with the GLA to get some bespoke targets and metrics to monitor Thames Water's progress against key areas of improvement. We helped secure a conditional allowance for London, and our intervention was instrumental in Ofwat granting the £480 million conditional allowance. That includes a contribution from Thames Water as well, ring-fenced from their shareholders, because I think it's wrong that shareholders are receiving dividends at a time when customers are receiving poor service and having bigger bills to pay.
Yeah, it makes literally no sense that you're handing out dividends at a time when pipes are leaking, and obviously we know that a freeze-thaw situation will result in this. I understand that the Deputy Mayor for Environment meets regularly with Sarah Bentley, who has come to Thames Water more recently. Is that proving to be a successful ongoing conversation, not just with Ofwat but also with Thames Water?
Well, so there's been a massive improvement in engagement with the Chief Executive, who is, a big improvement on the previous Chief Executive. We're not yet seeing, though, the improvements on the ground that we need to see. And I know Shirley's meeting with Sarah soon, and it's really important that we make progress in these areas because you're right, things don't appear to be getting better. And the weather conditions, what's happening with the pollution, is causing big concern to constituents of yours and mine who are paying record sums in their water bills.
Yes, and nobody wants to see, filth ending up in the Thames or indeed locally in the Wandle. Can I just turn to another utility that is now going to be subject to the electricity generator levy, which is the waste authorities across London are now going to be caught by the 45% from the 1st of January, where they are disposing of waste and making a profit through electricity generation. Would you be prepared to write to the Chancellor or indeed the Prime Minister to suggest that this is madness for them to be paying into the centre? I agree that where there's been huge profits made elsewhere in the energy sector, but these are companies working very closely with councils. Surely the money should be coming back to local people.
Yeah, in general terms, I support the windfall tax on these energy companies, particularly those who profit from fossil fuels and have profited from Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Can I look into this and get my team to speak to you about the details so we can make the relevant representations?
Certainly, I'm very happy to provide you with some more details because we've been looking at this. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Polanski on 7 years to 2030.
Thank you, Chair. Last summer, London has faced 40 degrees heat in our city. We faced flooding and we faced drought. The climate emergency is not a future event, it's all around us today. It's for that reason I declared a climate emergency, making London the first global city in the world to do so. With that announcement came an understanding that we had to do more and urgently. That's why I moved my net zero target from 2050 to 2030 and established a pathway to achieve that. As a result of the work, we know the challenge we need to meet is considerable. We need to retrofit over 210,000 homes each year and install 2.2 million heat pumps by 2030. We need to increase levels of walking, cycling and public transport use. We need to make our city more resilient to the impacts of our changing climate by adaptations. I'm using the limited powers and resources I have to deliver as much of the pathway as I can. We've made progress. In 2021, my London Plan policies resulted in nearly a 50% reduction in emissions from proposed new developments when compared to the national building regulations. Since 2019, my London Plan policies have so far provided for 38,400 new homes to be served by heat pumps. Since 2018, my Energy Efficiency Fund has mobilised over £330 million of funding for net zero projects. At the GLA itself, we've reduced carbon emissions by 79% since 2016. The ultra-low emission zone, opposed by the Conservatives from the start, has not only reduced nitrogen dioxide pollution by nearly half in central London, it's also reduced CO2 emissions from road transport in the central zone by 6% compared to if the zone wasn't in place. The plan to expand it next August will achieve more. However, the powers I have only deliver around a third of the reductions we need. We require action that includes powers and resources devolved to us from the government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to acknowledge among that list of achievements climate budgeting in London now. This is excellent. We only have 7 more climate budgets, though, until 2030, your target for net zero. Among your list of achievements, I noticed you didn't mention aviation in your climate pathway, and that's one of the places where actually emissions are slowly increasing. In fact, there'll be quite a rapid increase by 2050. How can we reduce aviation emissions in London when airports like City Airport are looking to expand?
Well, I had a really good meeting recently, conversation with the Chief Executive of Heathrow in relation to the progress in relation to sustainable aviation fuel, which is potentially really exciting. And the technology being worked on, I think the first really exciting aeroplane will fly next year. In relation to City Airport, I'm quite clear. There shouldn't be an expansion of City Airport. I'm not where the Greens are in relation to closing down airports, but I think we need to look at how we can reduce the carbon emissions from aviation.
I'm really proud that Greens want to shut down airports. I think that's a distinct difference between the Green Party and the Labour Party. We recognise this is a climate emergency and that needs to happen. On sustainable aviation fuel, this does worry me also. It reminds me a little bit of the last time we spoke about aviation. You showed support for the US and UK governments' response to aviation, which is Jet Zero. Now, we know a lot of that technology won't even exist by 2030. So when are you going to take responsibility for this and actually set a target in London to reduce aviation emissions?
Well, firstly, can I be clear? I am not in favour of closing airports.
You've made that very clear.
No doubt at all that we're not. And I say that knowing that my uncle and auntie are here from Pakistan, who otherwise would have taken them 6 months to get here by ship. So I'm pleased they're here to visit my mum. But the key thing is this: we have got the most, according to independent experts from around the globe, the most ambitious targets to get to net zero around the world. We've set a pathway between now and 2030, but I've said in answer to the first question that you asked, we only have a third of the powers in relation to those emissions. The other 2/3 are the responsibility of the government. And rather than driving a wedge, as he's determined to do between him and I thought he'd want to work with me to lobby the government around the other 2/3.
Absolutely work with you to lobby the government on those 2/3, but on those thirds, we have Scope 3 emissions. Now, your own plan with TfL shows that that's around taking off and landing with aviation. So I repeat the same question to you, Mr. Mayor. When will you set a target for reducing aviation emissions in London?
Well, he'll be aware that aviation is not in the gift of the Mayor. Aviation is
it's in your own plan. Scope 3 emissions, take off and landing.
Well, if the member can show me the powers I've got to reduce the number of flights at City and London, and clearly, Gatwick and Stansted affect us, I'm more than happy to, be educated by him and to be shown where we can do so. Look, what we can do is the megaphone stuff in relation to this issue. We can constructively work to make progress where we can in relation to carbon emissions, in relation to air quality, and in relation to congestion. I appreciate it works well with a vocal minority to go into this issue, but it's not conducive to a policy.
This isn't about minority, Mr. Mayor. This is about your own figures in your climate pathway, which show aviation emissions rising.
It's a situation
that's not going to work for net zero by 2030.
We've got to get to net zero carbon, and we're using all the tools in the City Hall toolkit to get there.
Sounds like the Mayor's out of ideas on this, but I hope you'll relook at your climate pathway.
It sounds like you're out of time, Assemblyman Blonsky. Question is in the name of Assemblymember Prince. It's on minimum service levels.
Thank you, Chair. Strikes aren't good for anyone, and no worker or union wants to have to make that difficult decision to take industrial action. They only do so as a last resort. And after 13 years of austerity and the effects of this government's disastrous mismanagement of the economy, we're seeing workers from nurses and ambulance staff to university lecturers and rail workers making that difficult decision. Time and time again, we're seeing the same thing. The government refusing even to enter into serious negotiations while seeking to demonise dedicated public servants and their representative unions through the media. And now the government is seeking to restrict some workers' rights to strike with the introduction of the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Bill to Parliament last week. If passed, this legislation would restrict the right to strikes across a range of industries, including health services, education, fire and rescue services, border security and transport services. The government is doing this under the guise of safety, but it's clear that this is all part of Minister's draconian approach to workers' rights. Safety is paramount at TfL. During periods of industrial action, TfL always seeks to run as many services as it safely can. Where possible, the focus of TfL operational managers is to provide services that enable customers to make connections onto other modes. The introduction of this legislation is a slap in the face to our heroic transport workers, nurses, ambulance workers, junior doctors, teachers, firefighters and others. The people who kept us going and kept us safe during the pandemic and who continue to do so now. It will not improve industrial relations. It will not reduce industrial action. What it will do is to confirm to the public how tone deaf this government is on public services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So by that, I can assume that although you once said strikes are ultimately a sign of failure, you're happy to keep failing and not to support the government to enable TfL to keep running and support the London economy.
Chair, I think there may have been some ambiguity in the interpretation of my answer. Can I be clear, for those who are unclear of my position, I am against the government's bill.
Are you also, therefore, Mr. Mayor, against the rights of the people of London to be able to travel around London? You are the chair of TfL, and are you saying that you would rather, although you've said you were a zero strikes mayor at one point, you would rather that TfL strike than support a measure that enables Londoners to get around? So are you backing the unions or backing the people of London, Mr. Mayor?
Let's be clear. Before the government imposed conditions on TfL, we'd managed to reduce the number of strikes in London by more than 73%. But let's also be clear, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the ambulance workers, the physiotherapists, the transport workers,
they need to get around London.
They all live in London.
They need to get around London.
They all live in London as well.
They need to get around, and you're not supporting their getting around London. Oh, I'm out of time. Sorry.
Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, particularly because of the divisive language that we've heard that seems to define unions as somehow different from people. You know, because people are union members too. Union members are people too. So I wanted to ask whether you agree that bringing legislation in to threaten the jobs of those key workers that risked their lives during COVID, such as transport workers and nurses, that the government should be doing everything they can to resolve these crises that stem from underfunding of NHS, underfunding of our transport system and the National Rail National Rail Network, and shouldn't they be providing the funding required to provide the public services that people and workers need?
Well, it's spot on. And here's the point. The cat was let out of the bag yesterday when a government minister confessed that more money's been spent in relation to the strikes than the deal that the heroic transport workers who kept our country going were asking for. And that's a good example of ideology and dogma preventing a deal being done and using legislation rather than negotiation. And by the way, this bill, if passed, would give the government and those who act on behalf of the government the powers to strike nurses for going on strike. Just think about that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next three questions have been withdrawn, Mr. Mayor.
Oh.
And the...
So sorry, Chair. The Tories don't want to ask about Met Police safety.
Yes, I'm very happy to.
They may
I'm
want to ask
very
a question.
happy.
Hang on. They may want to ask a question, but they're out of time, Mr. Mayor.
That's why I put the question in, Chairman, because I particularly did. But we're constrained by time. But if you'd like to take my question on police safety,
Chair,
please do.
They can't even organise themselves and their time management. How can they run this country in the city?
Mr. Mayor, Assembly members are responsible for managing their time.
Crikey.
They may want the answers, but they're not on this session. They're out of time in the session. So let's move on to the next question.
Chair, is that the London Fire Brigade?
It's on the enhanced monitoring of the London Fire Brigade. By Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you. Well, Chair, can I say I'm really grateful that the Labour members in this Assembly care about these issues and use their time sensibly so these issues can be raised in this fora. I've been in close contact with the Fire Commissioner, and he'll be grateful that the Labour members want to talk about these issues at Mayor's question time. He instructed Nazir Afzal to do his report in relation to the issues that we're talking about. I'll be attending the first LFB engaged meeting with HMI CFRS later this month. I'm confident that Andy Rowe, the Commissioner, recognises the scale of the problems facing the Brigade and has plans to address them. The Commissioner and I agree that all recommendations and findings must be acted upon with urgency and conviction to rebuild public trust and the confidence of staff and firefighters. Work's already started to deliver against the recommendations. A new independent service has now been set up to investigate complaints, and LFB will be piloting staff wearing body-worn cameras to give reassurance whilst they interact with the public. The Commissioner has also set out clear standards for managers and staff, including a clear definition of gross misconduct and the expectation that those accused of discrimination, harassment or bullying will be suspended whilst being investigated and dismissed if the complaint is upheld. These changes were necessary and will help improve standards and rebuild public confidence, but I've always been clear that despite the progress, there is still much more to do. That's why I'll continue to support and hold the Fire Commissioner to account on delivering a brigade that's trusted to serve and protect London and fits for the challenges of modern firefighting and a workplace where Londoners of all backgrounds can thrive.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. And I wanted to thank you for your earlier comments about nurses. Both my mother and my grandmother were nurses, and I had a conversation with my mother a few days ago, and she had been reading the news about NHS nurses striking, and thought it would be the last thing that nurses would naturally want to do. And I agree, and I know how hard they work and how difficult the decision's been. But I appreciate this is a question on the FBU. I think so far, it's pretty clear your determination and the Commissioner's determination to stamp out this behaviour and reform the brigade. I'm wondering, though, as we didn't get a chance earlier to hear about policing, I'm just wondering how, working with two reforming commissioners, how is that working? Are you able to kind of sort of spread capacity and really learn from each other in these two services that have come to it from very different angles? Obviously, with the fire brigade, they called for an inspection of themselves, whereas the police didn't get there from quite the same angle.
Sure. Well, and let's be clear. We've now been here for 3 hours. No questions from the Conservatives on nurses, on the police, or on firefighters. That shows where their priorities are and aren't, and Londoners will see for themselves where their priorities are. But you're right in relation to lessons that can be learned, and we should be incredibly proud that we're shining a light on these problems in London. Right? When you speak to either Nazir Afzal or to the HMI, there are, I'm afraid, examples of similar issues in other parts of the country, in the fire service and indeed in the police service. And the good news is other fire services and police services around the country are looking at London, but also the fire service and the police service in London are working together. So Andy Rowe and Mark Rowley are working closely together, seeing if they can avoid duplication, learn from each other. If somebody's ahead of the other, they can learn from each other. And the key areas that you know have been well rehearsed in relation to previous questions raised by Urmesh Sai in the police service: supervision, leadership, training, similar issues in the fire service, cultural issues going back a long way, issues in the fire service and the Met police service. The need for reforming commissioners are in both services, but also we welcome the support of the HMI in the engaged process. We should be encouraging others to come in and help out. And we're going to do that.
Thank you for that. And, alongside of this, I mean, we've spoken a bit about this in past, but other fire services are also under the engaged process and with enhanced monitoring due to cultural issues. And we have seen similar issues also in South Wales. Do you agree that issues of culture are long-standing and UK-wide? And how are we seeking to share London's experience with other fire services across the UK?
So look, it's quite clear they are. But other parts of the country haven't shone a spotlight on this. Let's be frank, right? And you will be aware, because you've witnessed some of the criticism I received in the last few years when I've been calling out bad behaviour in the police, for example, right? And it's worth reminding ourselves, the only reason the fire service is engaged is because our brave commissioner asked Nazir Afzal to do this piece of work. And as a consequence, we went into engage. My nervousness of that is other fire services and police services may say, you know what? We don't want to shine a spotlight because it could mean bad publicity and the engaged process. I hope they don't do that, but that's the concern I have. But I'm afraid in the fire service, we know it's not unique to London. It's not unique to just some of the fire stations named in Nazir Afzal's report, but it's, I suspect, an issue around the country. You mentioned Gloucestershire and Wales. But I think these are systemic cultural issues that probably should be addressed all over the country, and that's what I'm hoping that the HMI process enables that to happen. It is with the police, with the College of Policing and colleagues across the country. PCC's doing really good work around the country. I hope it happens in the fire service as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do agree with you. I hope it doesn't deter other services from proactively reviewing their culture, because it's important to stamp this out, and that's become very, very clear.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's really important it doesn't.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I make a quick point of order, please, on a misrepresentation of debate? Thank you. We've spoken about all those issues today for our questioning. And one thing that I think is really important for the Mayor to remember is that every single person in this room cares about those issues in London and cares about London.
This is a speech, not
what we disagree on is policy, and I think it's fair to reflect on the language, because those points have all been raised. So I'd really appreciate if the Mayor could reflect on his language.
Assembly Best.
That's what Twitter was.
You must. There was no personal point of order. There is no such thing as such.
No, it was a point of order on a misrepresentation of debate.
Hang on. You've had a number of Assembly members who could have spoken, and they have spoken. I have not. Each Assembly member decides what the topics are. I mean, I didn't choose the topics.
Be a fortune. That's the lesson of this.
What I think is we must not start intervening without going to the chair, right? And this point of order thing, right? I'm going to really write a big paper on this, right? There's no such thing as a point of order. It's a question when you've been named, right? We've interpreted, but there's no thing in legislation.
Chair, to be fair, I think it's practice for if she ever becomes an MP.
Sorry,
hang on.
Did you say there's no point of orders?
This point of personal clarification can only arise, right, when there is when you've been named, right? Okay.
Chair, can I just be clear?
There's no point. No, there is no point of clarifications or point of order or things like that. It's all left to the discretion of the chair on these issues, right? Yes, we can take this offline. I know the Mayor's been forgotten about this. Okay, we're nearly there. Well, we know. Hang on. Hang on. Can we just come to the? Can we? I know people are still watching on the webcast. They're still watching. Okay. And I know that Assembly Member Baker has a very important question to ask you.
Very important question.
Pardon?
Absolutely right.
Yes. Look, we have a very important question to ask. I know the Labour Group have some questions they want to ask. So can I ask Assembly Member Baker to ask her last question?
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the member for her question? Following last year's consultation, I announced the expansion of the ULEZ London-wide to tackle the triple challenges of air pollution, the climate emergency and congestion, ensuring 5 million more Londoners can breathe cleaner air. Last week, TfL launched a multi-channel campaign to raise awareness with Londoners and home county drivers so they can get ready for the expansion. I've also announced a £110 million scrappage scheme to help those who need it most to prepare for the scheme. A report by Element Energy found that car vehicle kilometres would need to reduce by 27% by 2030, alongside other interventions to achieve net zero carbon. This could include replacing existing charging schemes with a single scheme that is fair and simple for customers and which makes use of more sophisticated technology. TfL is currently exploring how this concept could be developed and is taking the feedback from last year's consultation on board. Investing in transport, particularly in outer London, is key to my transport strategy. Speaking generally, any new form of smart road user charging would need to be introduced alongside wider measures such as public and active transport improvements, freight consolidation and co-location of services. Any formal proposals which could be developed would be subject to further engagement and consultation, supported by information on detailed scheme proposals and their likely impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, I'm very interested in the future of so-called smart road user charging. So that we can move to something that's simpler, that that accurately reflects people's needs to drive where they do need to. What I want to ask about particularly is about the debate on driving costs, and as we've seen today, it is very polarised, and I do think that some politicians feel that it benefits them to stoke division where maybe interests actually align, but it actually damages us all and damages our political system. So I think maybe people need to think carefully. So what can we do, both you and us as Assembly members, to ensure we have a robust debate but an inclusive debate on these issues?
I think it's difficult with the current state of the Tory party, to be frank. So the Tory party used to be the party of home ownership. Because homeowners now hate the Tories because of interest rates and their policy the last 12 years, the Tories have now become the party of car owners. And that's why it's polarised. And so all this noise you saw today, would rather than ask about the nurses, the cost of living crisis, policing, what happened with David Carrick, the fire service, and the other real issues Londoners are facing, they asked questions that vested interest, brackets, those that fund the Tory party, close brackets, and some of their car driver membership are asking them to raise. And that's why it's really difficult to have these sensible debates that you want to have. We're going to try, though, because we're going to try to explain to Londoners that if they're a car owner, they pay road tax, right? That road tax is used by the government in other parts of the country in policies that don't benefit Londoners. And so a whole discussion needs to be had about the price those who drive a car pay and the lack of fairness in that. And smart road user charging, if done properly, is one way to make it fair. Because why should you and I breathe in poison that their members put out? Right? Why should those who use public transport subsidise the roads in London? That can't be fair.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to say I'm absolutely supportive of the Labour Party being the party of public transport, although, you know, lots of our members do have to drive for all sorts of reasons as well. So I think it's more that the Conservatives would like to be the party of car drivers, but I don't think they are, especially as they don't, the sort of lobbies that we get about this issue aren't representative, particularly, say, on gender. So I think you need to think about who you're representing. So many areas of London, on another subject, many areas of London, especially out of London, as you've said, really need to improvements in the low level of public transport accessibility we currently have. Do you have a sense yet of what level of investment in public transport would be needed to ensure that we can allow people to swap journeys that don't need to be done by car necessarily, so they have viable alternatives in terms of public transport?
Well, yes. So firstly, of course, you know, we've got to support those who need to use their cars, right? And so my point is that they perceive in their minds that because they've been hollowed out, and so now that they think absolutely. That they are the party that represents car drivers, they clearly aren't. We know that in relation to our experience, but also speaking to voters across London. We've also got to free up our roads of congestion to allow those who need to use their cars not to be stuck in traffic. The average driver last year, 155 hours stuck in their cars because of congestion. So our policies are addressing three issues: air quality, climate change, and reducing congestion as well. But you're right, we've got to give alternatives if we're going to encourage people to leave their cars at home. Sometimes it won't be possible, let's be frank. Longer journeys, big shopping, and so forth, big family, and so forth. There are reasons why people will want to use their cars and won't be able to use their cars. The issue is the cost of using your car and who pays for it. That's what the smart road use charging is about, but also having alternatives. So let me give you an example. If a smart road use charging scheme was to ask those who have got no alternatives to their car to pay less than those who've got many alternatives to use their car for a short journey to pay more, that would encourage that person in the latter category to use public transport or to walk and cycle. That's some of the stuff that I hope TfL will be looking into. But you're right, we've got to give alternatives to those who want to do the right thing but can't because they're not near a tube station, they're not near an overground station, there's currently no bus near them. They live in a part of London where they don't feel they can cycle or because they can't cycle for a good reason. So you're right. We've got to look into where we are. We're doing some of this mapping. We've done some of this mapping in the past. I announced a few weeks ago 1 million kilometres of additional bus lanes in outer London. I'll be making a further announcement to double that. So there'll be 1 million kilometres in outer London, 1 million kilometres across London. A lot of that will be in outer London as well.
Thanks very much, Martin. Nothing more to add now.
Yes, Assemblymember Duval wants to come in.
Can we just tackle one of the big lies about this? One of the lies is the Conservatives are all the Conservatives are completely opposed to ULEZ and issues of that. Tell me, in the negotiations with government, and particularly around TfL, has any government minister ever told you not to proceed with ULEZ or to stop? And wasn't there an issue? And we talk about, you know, the bluntness of the tour around congestion charging. Wasn't the issue where they were encouraging you to go for the blunt tour rather than having a proper discussion about to use it properly? But they're not opposed to ULEZ, or this lot are opposed to ULEZ, but government isn't opposed to ULEZ, or they'd stop you, wouldn't they?
Correct. Let me give you. I've only got a short time left. Let me explain. Since I've been mayor, introducing the T-charge, opposed by the Tories in the Assembly. Introducing the ULEZ when I did, opposed by the Tories in the Assembly. Expanding it to Inner London, opposed by the Tories in the Assembly. Expanding ULEZ to all of London, opposed by the Tories in the Assembly. Even though they've seen the difference it's made in Central and Inner London, the Conservatives in government not simply encouraging me to go faster with ULEZ, but also said the congestion charge shouldn't just cover Central London, the congestion charge should cover all of London. That's where the Tories are in central government. But we saw yesterday this nonsense where a weak Prime Minister bowed to some of the questions from two of his backbenchers and threw them some red meat, saying he's opposed to the expansion of the ULEZ, playing to the galleries in relation to this issues. But again, what's his answer to the triple challenges of climate change, air quality and reducing congestion? He has no answers. The Conservatives in government have no answers. And what's clear from this morning's and this afternoon's MQTs is the Tories in the Assembly certainly have no answers.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, that brings us to the end of the MQT. So thank you very much for your answers. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out in the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to note the changes to the terms and conditions of Baroness Twycross, who was appointed Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience by the Mayor under Section...
I'd like to make a comment on that. Is that now, or do you need to get through your...
Pardon?
Do I speak now, or do you...
Well, let me just finish the sentence off, right?
Okay.
Who was appointed Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience by the Mayor under Section 67(1)(b) of the GLA Act.
Just to make a couple of comments on this, I personally think the timing on this for the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience to go part-time is slightly worrying, because we all know that the results of the cultural review were absolutely terrible and they were very shocking. The fire brigade is still in special measures in the engaged process. The Mayor himself just now said how much work there is to do, and he talked about the level of scrutiny that needs to go on. And for the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience to go part-time now is slightly worrying. If this is to be the case, the Mayor has to tell us who is going to pick up that piece of work, who's going to push through. I do know that we're going back to the situation as it was before, because the Deputy Mayor would have been 3 days a week then, but we are in a very particular situation now, and the Mayor must explain how he's going to fill that very considerable gap, because we would all tell you that the Deputy Mayor has been very good. She's been very, very effective, but she'll be less effective because she'll be around a lot less. He has to tell us how he's going to fill that gap.
Well, Assembly... This was not a matter for the Assembly, this is just a note. But I think you are quite right to ask him the question. Maybe this will be your next Mayor's question time in the next session.
Just to say, Chair, it was in my question, but we ran out of time because, of course, we do care about the fire brigade.
Okay, no, and so for you, so this question can be asked of the Mayor.
And it will be. I just want to be on the record.
Okay, but I observe your comments, but this was not a decision which the Assembly had any intervention on at all. Thank you. Okay.
Chair, in writing to the Mayor about the issue, and I think it's appropriate that you do so, But you do need to stress, as the member outlined before, this was a part-time position. It only increased because of COVID. Now, there are circumstances that rightly the Assembly member wants to be satisfied on. I think that's a fair comment. But I want to include in any letter to the Mayor the recognition that it was a part-time position before.
Great. I think we will note that. Thanks. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary draft budget meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 26th of January 2023 in the Chamber of City Hall. There is no urgent business requiring consideration, but I just want to remind the members of the Transport Committee that there's an informal briefing at 1:30.
Sorry, it's all members, Chair.
It says, well, I hear it says it here in the Transport Committee, but it's been updated. Okay, so for all members for London Destination Zero training in committees 5 and 6. So, in the absence of any urgent business,